Right, so Rishi Sunak might have hoped to turn things around a little bit this summer, but he's failed miserably. And his parliamentary party are sharpening their knives as yet another unwelcome Tory party leadership challenge is being mooted. Could be on the cards before very much longer, with reports that renewed letters of no confidence have gone in against him, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, his supporters will still claim, he's been very unlucky, that he's inherited an ice cream sundae of a shambles, as it were, from Boris Johnson, with Liz the Lettuce Truss being the cherry on the top. And as much as we as socialists, we on the left, can agree with such a point, Sunak has come in seemingly riding on a wave of personal ambition, but without any real ideas of his own. In that respect, he's not unlike Keir Starmer, really. The unluckiness pointed to will be the scandals that have been beyond his control, from the likes of Nadhim Zahawi and his tax affairs to Dominic Raab and his bullying. I would argue he set himself up for this fall to an extent by striving to lead the Tory party and achieving it in the manner that he has, not a single person voting for him to be PM, not the party membership who had already rejected him, the brown-skinned man, in favour of the epically bad choice of white-skinned Liz Truss. But of course he only got the gig in the end through being unchallenged for it. I still believe if anyone else had stood against Sunak that last leadership election time, if it had again gone to a vote of the membership, he would have lost it, because the membership do not like him. And I believe his ethnicity plays a part in that. The racism of the right wing is no real secret. Their culture war on migrants as a viable electioneering tactic appeals to people of that mindset after all. But aside from denying his own party a say in his coronation, if we can call it that, the general public were again denied their say in democracy. Now, the naysayers will remind us we don't have presidential elections in this country. We vote for local candidates, certain parties they may belong to, and whichever the biggest party is, they choose who leads them after all. And although they are, of course, absolutely right in saying that, it nonetheless doesn't sit right with the public that somebody is running the country without having gone to the country first. We still have a sense of wanting to see fair play, even if in reality we often get denied that by stealth. But blatant impositions of the nation's leader is a really bad look. And replacing Sunak now is not going to change that. But aside from the background to a lot of Sunak's problems, he's been a very weak leader in his own right anyway. His 5 pledges, which he staked his reputation on, and his chances going into the next election have all been failures. Inflation is set to rise again next month, according to predictions. The getting the national debt down pledge was a nonsense to begin with. We're going to head into a winter period with new COVID variants on the rise once more. So getting NHS waiting lists down faces yet another obstacle on top of all the underinvestment and continued privatisation via outsourcing and ongoing industrial action going on in that sector, with consultants and junior doctors now set to coordinate action going forwards, fighting to first and foremost rectify a service the Tories have rendered unsafe. Economic growth is for the birds in such a climate, teetering on the brink of recession once more as we are, and Sunak himself has now admitted he's likely to fail on his pledge to stop the boats because the illegal migration bill is a sick joke in violation of human rights legislation, and is likely just going to herald attempts to see us ditch the Human Rights Convention under this unelected government in order that they might continue their culture war against vulnerable people. But policy alone isn't the sole extent of his failure and weakness. As much as Nadhim Zahawi and Dominic Raab's issues preceded Sunak's premiership to an extent, he failed to suspend them when he was in charge, when said issues gained public prevalence on his watch, demonstrating how pitiful and weak a leader he is, as small in power within his own party as he is in stature. Handing Suella Braverman the Home Secretary gig when he became leader was a surefire sign he has never really been in charge, as he's clearly beholden utterly to her ERG faction. And that is very much the reason why, despite her abject unsuitability, racism, and frankly fascistic, in my view, tendencies, she's still in post. Even members of his own party, parliamentary party, are deplored by her. She's been referred to as a real racist bigot by a member of her own side. So what does that say of Sunak, that he maintains support for her? Where else can we point to? Liz Truss, of all people, has said of him he has no plans for growth, ignoring the fact she caused the biggest economic calamity in recent years, of course. He's seen as having stabbed Boris Johnson in the back, adding to his unpopularity within both the Tory membership and his parliamentary party. So many Tories are stepping down ahead of the next election, the public are seeing this and thinking this guy's a loser, and they don't want to back him. Very much the basis for Keir Starmer's poll lead as they are. It isn't so much Labour winning the next election, rather it is the Tories under Sunak losing it. And that is becoming more obvious. Environmental protections are getting ditched as our rivers stink, and now developer protections are getting ditched. No plans to clean things up until the 2060s, but they're quite happy to make them worse in the meantime. All of that, of course, a slow bit-by-bit bonfire of EU regulations since we Brexited. The Brexit benefits, as these are, they're not benefits at all. Any real positive benefits are still yet to be seen, despite Leave campaigners like Sunak extolling benefits that don't exist. Sunak also abjectly doesn't care about climate change, and this is seeing Tory voters bleeding away to more conservationist-orientated parties, chiefly the Greens. Above all, political parties are judged on the economy, and Brexit has trashed that. Food prices up, energy bills up, fuel prices up, and Sunak has simply thrown more bad money after bad, with bungs to the companies behind these to offset our bills, rather than renationalising the services, as should be the obvious, necessary thing to do. Ideologically opposed to doing that, to doing the right thing, to doing what benefits us, something becoming more and more readily apparent to more and more people. So Sunak is politically inept, disliked by his own party from the membership up to the parliamentarians, and disliked by voters for his ongoing litany of failure, made worse by the fact nobody elected him to lead the country to begin with. No mandate to do so, other than the ones he keeps inheriting. He's done for. He cannot win. And putting the icing on that particular cake is the departure of his advisor Amber de Botton, who came into her advisory role when Sunak became leader just under a year ago, and she's off as well now. She's used the now is the right time to move on excuse, which translates in political speak as this entire enterprise is now a big shit sandwich now and I'm off. And so we come to letters of no confidence going in as the summer ends. It should come as no surprise, really. Sunak's one-year grace period coming to an end as it is, and with an election needed to be called by January of 2025 at the latest, the Tories can see the writing on the wall. They will lose, with Sunak still leading them, so the letters have gone in. 52 apparently have gone in. If true, I think that works out at only 2 more being needed to trigger a no-confidence vote in Sunak once that grace period of his ends on the 25th of October. He'll have this hanging over his head for weeks now as a virtual certainty by then. I can only imagine how bad Tory conference will be at the start of that month. The wind's still in Keir Starmer's sails currently as things stand. If passed, and that's a big if, such votes aren't always successful, but given the scale of defeat the Tories currently face come the next election, based on current polling, who would rule that out right now? Yet having said all of that, the prospect of inflicting yet another unelected Prime Minister on the country may not work out to the Tories' favour again. Is there literally anybody left, incidentally, who could literally unite that party now, fractured and busted as it is? Nevertheless, it's hard to imagine anyone could do worse than Sunak now. So is damage limitation enough of an impetus for change for some? Is it just a case of, can I save my own seat if we get rid of Sunak now, going to be what's ticking away in some MPs' minds? What do you think? Is another leadership contest in the Tory party in the offing? Will it make a difference? Who do you reckon might go for it if it passes? Have your say in the comments below. Be part of the conversation. Have your say. Thanks for watching. Hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a vid recommendation where Sunak may feel his way out is to call the election early and wrong foot some of his own MPs. And there's a few other reasons why that might work out for him too. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer has been having a bit of a reshuffle today, and there's probably a few videos in it, if I'm honest. Maybe, maybe not. See how they go. Because it's just unfeasibly horrible in several different ways, with several different appointments. But far and away, the standout for me has been the resignation of Dr. Rosina Allen-Khan, quitting the front bench because Keir Starmer has decided there's no space for mental health within his cabinet portfolio. Well, really. Mental health is one of the biggest health crises of our time, not least because more people are affected by it, with their lives being made ever harder, disproportionately high amongst those targeted by sanctions, the poorest, the sickest, the disabled having their conditions worsened. But pretty much every single demographic going in this country is now seeing more and more cases of mental health suffering and struggle. The pandemic particularly saw cases skyrocket, particularly amongst children. As is ever the case, though, there has been underinvestment and abandonment of the issue under the Tories, leading to massive waiting lists to be seen, a lack of trained mental health doctors and nurses to help deal with this issue. It has been a problem under the Tories for so long that Theresa May, remember her, back when she was still in charge of the country, seemed ages ago now, doesn't it? She created the cabinet post of Suicide Minister, the full title being Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Mental Health, Inequalities and Suicide Prevention, which is just the most catastrophically named government post. What an admittance of failure. when with proper mental health provision, you would get suicide down, and suicide rising, or suicide cases rising, would never have been a thing. Now, the first holder of this post was Jackie Doyle-Price, but she was soon replaced by, as if this really helps people's mental health, Nadine Bloody Dorries, which is frankly just pissing on you and calling it rain. The job has had the suicide bit stripped out since, a bit too on the nose for modern Tories, and is now Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Mental Health and Women's Health Strategy. Suicide is, incidentally though, the biggest killer of men under the age of 50 these days, but sure, Keith, mental health doesn't matter enough to you anymore to warrant a cabinet portfolio post. Well, you did once though, didn't you? At the 2021 Labour Party conference, you said that you would guarantee mental health treatment within a month for all who need it, setting a new NHS target, ensuring that patients start receiving appropriate treatment within a month of referral. And you also said you would be recruiting 8,500 new staff so that 1 million additional people can access treatment every year by the end of Labour's first term in office. You would also put an open access mental health hub for children and young people in every community, providing early intervention and drop-in services, and you would also provide specialist mental health support in every school so that they can support pupils and resolve problems before they escalate. That there will be a full-time mental health professional in every single secondary school and a part-time professional in every primary school. You also said that you would improve service quality, bringing in the first ever long-term whole government plan for improving mental health outcomes, making early intervention a reality and broadening the range of services to those with severe mental health illnesses. And you would give mental health its fair share of funding, pledging that NHS spending on mental health would never fall, and a fair share of mental health funding every time new funding is provided to the NHS. But it's all binned now, I suppose, yeah? Problem is still there, though. So what gives? Why now? Why have you done this now? Maybe there's a more base, more childish reasoning behind Starmer's flip. It's certainly something people are talking about on social media. And that is this post, this mental health brief that Starmer is now bidding was, after all, created by a certain Jeremy Corbyn. And the first MP given the role was Luciana Berger, and she saw how seriously she took the role by flouncing out to start up the funny tinge party Change UK. Starmer is such a small-minded individual, for many, they would not put this past him to ditch the post on that basis. But if that is the case, why has he waited until now to do it? Well, despite Starmer's evident indifference to the role and to the mental health crisis, the last holder of that post, or the most recent one, Dr. Rosina Allen-Chan, did try and make a good fist of this role. She has regularly brought up the subject of needing better mental health provision, more mental health beds, more staff. Heck, it's all stuff the whole NHS needs, really, isn't it? But this is her brief, and so she fought her corner on it. An actual NHS doctor, as she is, still does shifts to this day. The kind of second jobbing I actually don't mind at all. And she's just been shut down each time by the health minister, her boss, Wes Streeting, who instead bleats about increasing private provision, utterly wedded to whatever NHS reform Keir Starmer vaguely mentions without ever any detail, unless we forget Streeting decided to make a disgusting dementia-related slur aimed at Jeremy Corbyn just at the end of last year that was picked up on the Commons microphones when he referred to Corbyn as having gone senile. Both Starmer and Streeting are also recipients of substantial private health funding, so it's little wonder why Starmer has a wet fart like Wesley in charge of the shadow health brief and not the far more qualified NHS doctor, which would seem to be the obvious role for the obvious person for the job. But then Allen-Chan genuinely wants to help the NHS, and Starmer and Streeting are just going to keep going where the Tories left off. So, Rosina Allen-Chan, with her post being abolished, supporters of Stormzy, the Stormtroopers, are saying, well, she can't have resigned if her post was being abolished. But then her resignation letter reveals this has been on the cards for a little while, and she doesn't exactly hold back in her swipe at Starmer, because in it she wrote, "You made clear that you do not see a space for mental health portfolio in a Labour cabinet, which is why I told you many weeks ago that I would not be able to continue in this role." In other words, Starmer isn't so much abolishing the role, more demoting it from cabinet level, reducing its importance, and that is something Rosina Allen-Chan cannot support him doing, and so will not continue in that role. That's called a resignation. It has also had wider repercussions, because for all the factionalism we can aim at Starmer and his actions to demote or remove people he blatantly just doesn't like, Allen-Chan is no lefty. She's very much the Starmer type, what they risibly call moderates. What has happened here is that she's put her dedication to health, the NHS, her profession as a doctor first before her politics, and that exposes pretty blatantly the Tory lightism that is driving Red Tory Labour. But maybe it's a sign of things getting worse, not better, because with people like Alan Cann out and promotions for others like the singularly dreadful Blairite Liz Kendall, who is now being put in charge of work and pensions, maybe Labour still isn't right-wing enough for Starmer. And even these so-called moderates like Alan Cann are now too left-wing for him. Whatever the conversations behind closed doors of the Labour Party, though, Starmer has once again abandoned another policy position, has once more thrown vulnerable people under the bus, and his devotion now to the private health sector just makes me think he's had conversations there that perhaps there's just no profit in mental health for the lobbyists handing him and streeting their 30 pieces of silver to damn the NHS with further. What do you think of this resignation? Kudos to Alan Cann or too little too late? Is this electorally damaging to abandon mental health for Labour, do you reckon? Have your say on this story in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's video recommendation where behind the scenes there might be an even more to this healthcare civil war happening within the Labour Party right now, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the Starmer types are not happy bunnies right now up on the Wirral, as their factional rigging of selections has all of a sudden blown up in their faces. A little bit of karma, all thanks to the Green Party. They thought they were onto a winner here. Now they've gotten rid of the lefty socialist incumbent MP for Birkenhead ahead of the next election, a chap called Mick Whitley. Boundary changes, giving Starmer and co the opportunity to do this. Reduce the socialist bit of the democratic socialist claim of their party ethos that's on their membership cards, and saving the bacon of one of their worst, former chair of the right-wing faction Progress, Alison McGovern, whose own seat was being abolished by the very same boundary changes Starmerites have been weaponising against the left-wing MPs. This was an instance where it has paid off. But then along came the Green Party and stuck socialism firmly back on that ballot, all whilst rubbing the Labour rights racism weaponising noses in it too, for good measure, because the Greens have selected former Labour councillor turned Green Party councillor Joe Bird to stand for them against McGovern in Birkenhead. Birkenhead is solidly Labour, some of you might be thinking, yet Labour's conduct in the North East has been nothing short of offensive and appalling for quite some time now. For example, forcing Labour city councillors in Liverpool out for not supporting a Tory-imposed budget, thus creating the now rapidly growing in popularity Liverpool Independence Group, is one such example. They who have taken city council seats from Labour since and are looking at taking another in an upcoming by-election. That's just one instance. Back on the Wirral itself, in Birkenhead, the switch from a socialist MP to a right-wing red Tory one isn't going down well either there. It's a lot of resentment and anger towards Labour for their blatantly factional behaviour. For one thing, this runoff between two serving MPs was completely unnecessary, as the MP for Wirral West, Margaret Greenwood, was vacating her seat and McGovern could have just gone there. There's hell up in that constituency too, but that'll have to wait for another video. But let's look at the numbers here in Birkenhead too, because ultimately they are, at the end of the day, what counts, isn't it? In 2019, Labour won with a majority of nearly 18,000 there, well ahead of every other candidate on the ballot. And in fact, the Green Party came last. So why are they all of a sudden this threat to Labour then? Well, actually, it's been true that this is a really safe seat. You can see why Starmer wants an ally like McGovern to go there. His current shadow minister for employment as she is. Her own majority in her outgoing seat as being abolished, Wirral South, was only just over 6,000, so she was far more vulnerable there. But the Greens have become a threat because of the surge in popularity that we've seen over the course of this summer for their party. They did devastatingly well in Birkenhead, along with the rest of the country, catapulting them up the results table to finish on top in this year's local elections there. The party that came last in the 2019 general election gained 12 seats and 38% of the vote in the locals, compared to Labour losing 5 Wirral Council seats, taking 36% of the vote. The other parties, the Tories, the Lib Dems, again, they were nowhere to be seen, just as they weren't anywhere to be seen in 2019. But the stories are far, far different for the Green Party. Now, people will say that voters vote differently in general elections and local elections, and they aren't good indicators of how people will vote one to another. And they would be right to an extent in saying that. But if the same voting pattern were to be repeated, the Greens would win this seat at the next general election. This is, in effect, no longer a safe Labour seat, when the Greens won Birkenhead back in May. If you think Labour are shrugging their shoulders at the prospect of the Green Party giving them a run for their money, well, you'd be wrong there. Because their reaction to the Green Party announcing Joe Bird as their candidate has had them wailing and making some very familiar, odious noises about it at that. Joe Bird is a former Labour councillor, as I said, who joined the Green Party after being expelled from Labour for the crime of speaking at a pro-Corbyn meeting, and was indeed re-elected earlier this year to sit on Wirral Council, a seat Labour obviously lost through their own petty, vindictive factionalism. Bird is also Jewish, so what made her expulsion back in 2021 all the more contemptible is that it came just days after Starmer told a meeting of Labour Friends of Israel that his party will be a place for all Jews. Clearly not true if Joe Bird was not welcome to be part of it, though Starmer's view of what counts as Jewish might be a bit different to a lot of people's, Zionist without qualification as he is. And speaking to LFI about such things, friends of an apartheid state, frankly, well, this speaks for itself, doesn't it? Bird expected it, wasn't perturbed by it at all, and upon receiving the news of her expulsion said, "I'm delighted the Labour Party has expelled me today. I'm free from fear about speaking and meeting with other people. I continue to work for the people of Bromborough as your councillor, for the many, not the few. This racist Labour Party is dying as a vehicle for social justice." Not mincing her words, defiant, and she's continued to be ever since. She's also popular in her area. To give you an example of just how terrified of this lady Labour are, how determined they were to single her out, they literally sent Starmer's sidekick, David Evans, to Bromborough back in April as part of the local election campaign. The General Secretary of the Labour Party himself sent all the way to canvass against Joe Bird, begging and pleading for local Labour members to come out and join him on the doorstep, and they still failed. Of the 3 council seats up for grabs in Bromborough earlier this year, it was a clean sweep for the Green Party, with Bird herself taking 20% of the vote. If anything, the prominence of Evans appearing on the Wirral just showed people how terrified of their local favourite the highest echelons of the Labour Party were. And so they're making it clear again now, with Bird having been selected as the Green parliamentary candidate. She's well known, she's popular, she's local, and Labour have offered up a right-wing replacement for an MP they've been perfectly happy to vote in with a decent majority last time out. Nobody can accuse Mick Whitley of not earning his seat. McGovern is just looking to maintain her spot on the gravy train, but such is the fear in Labour of losing this seat that smears are rapidly getting circulated now. The most oft-used accusation against Bird is that she was expelled over anti-Semitism. Oh, that one again. How boring. She wasn't. She just dared still support to Jeremy Corbyn, stood by her socialist principles, and got thrown out for it by a party leadership who have no principles, at least not ones that aren't for sale to the highest bidder. One Twitter user, @PiesMcQ, put the reasoning for this better than I ever could in a tweet to me. They said there's going to be massive amounts of attacks on Joe Bird from now on. Know why? 1, she's a great councillor who trashed Labour in Bromborough. She's my local councillor in brackets. And 2, most importantly, they are shit scared of her because she could very well beat Alison McGovern. Couldn't agree more, Pies. The Greens have selected a Jewish candidate, and the accusations she's anti-Jew have come down on her. Isn't implying someone is a self-hating Jew anti-Semitic itself? Somebody remind me, I'm sure that it is. Some people really ought to watch themselves here. But the lengths Labour are going to are hilarious here. Jewish News, always ready to bash the left, especially when the piece is penned by Lee Harpin, went to the Jewish Labour movement. Labour movement, because asking Labour about a Green Party candidate is absolutely normal, of course. And naturally, the JLM's Mike Katz was happy to put the boot in. He said, it's bad enough the Green Party accepting Joe Bird into their ranks after she was expelled from Labour for supporting groups which denied the party's problem with anti-Semitism. JLM wrote to their leaders to point out rewarding racism wasn't progressive, but they ignored us. Now they've decided to double down and install Ms. Bird as a parliamentary candidate. Do the Greens really think she's fit to be an MP? This is a terrible decision and will offend Jews in Merseyside and beyond. To that, as a Green myself, I say to hacks like Harpin, other media, and especially factional fools like Katz, to stay in your lane. If you want to conduct yourselves as you have in relation to anti-Semitism, weaponising it for factional purposes as you have, then you do you. People will leave. They won't stand by you. I did, and like Joe Bird, I've never looked back since joining the Greens myself. If you want to carry on weaponising this issue, then just carry on doing it. If you want to attack your own members and supporters with purges and suspensions and expulsions, and unjust as so many of them have been, then don't be surprised you're losing support to the Greens, especially when so many of us have found it to be the new home of socialism. We support each other in the Green Party. We don't turn on each other. Reinforcing that is a tweet from Deputy Green Party leader himself, Zach Polanski, also Jewish, funnily enough, nailing the point home. He said there's been 5 Jewish people in leadership positions in British political history. I'm really proud to be one of them, and I'm proud of the role the Jewish Greens play more widely in the Green Party. Now let's go get Joe elected in Birkenhead. What Labour are doing is not only seeking to drive socialists out of their own party, but to delegitimise the politics of the left. And so they're now turning on the Greens. Hell will freeze over the day that any of us in the Green Party should take any notice of Labour and the state they're in, with how they conduct themselves. We'll deal with the scourge of real anti-Semitism our way, properly, when it's the real deal, and not just because you keep making false claims which harm the real fight against the real thing. The attacks on Jo Bird will continue, but she's strong, she's focused, and she's taking no nonsense. She is popular not only because she's hardworking and competent, but because she stands for the many, not the few, still. We're allowed to do that in the Green Party, and as such, Birkenhead, despite having lost Mick Whitley, will still have a socialist option on that general election ballot. If you miss that sense of fighting for change, for socialist ideals, to fix this country in our interests, rather than that of the establishment, having left Labour or become disenfranchised by them yourself, you would do worse than to join us, quite frankly. Jo Bird can indeed beat Alison McGovern. Labour know it, and they're bricking it. And the most delicious piece of irony of all is that having Jo Bird standing against them now is entirely of their own doing. I wish Jo all the luck in the world. She will make an epic MP, and the North West can still proudly claim to be the socialist capital of Britain. It just means ditching the red and taking up green. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Do leave a comment and have your say about all of this. Are you with me and feel green is the way to go? Have you been impressed by Jo Bird, or is she still unfamiliar to you? She's, well, worth looking into a little bit further. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer's insistence that oil and gas investors need certainty and staunch refusal to ditch new prospective oil and gas field licences being granted by Rishi Sunak, well, they're opening the door to further Greens electorally. If he won't offer change, then others will. It's the Greens for me, in which case, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so despite a resignation in protest at dumping mental health as a cabinet-level concern by one of the few shadow cabinet members actually qualified for their brief in Dr. Rosina Allen-Khan, it's worth talking a bit more about Keir Starmer's reshuffle, because this is his chosen team to go into the next general election. And so in that vein, it's perhaps no surprise that he's promoted even more right-wingers to more important roles. And if you want a flavour of just how Blairite things have become, look no further than Tony Blair superfan John McTernan, former special advisor himself, not a very good one, as Scottish Labour and the Australian Labour Party will attest to, but who you can always rely on to just say just that little bit too much, by tweeting out excitedly, 5 Blair-era special advisors in Keir's new shadow cabinet now! To which someone answered, should we prepare for war? And McTernan's reply of, only just wars, should, to anyone who thought the title of this vid was a little bit on the nose, that actually it really isn't. For those wondering who McTernan is on about, the shadow cabinet, former Spanzer, Pat McFadden, Liz Kendall, Peter Kyle, Hilary Benn and Ed Miliband. Of these 5, only Ed Miliband remains unchanged in his brief. The other 4 have all been brought in or promoted in a sign of that rightwards lurch, though. Liz Kendall, the unapologetic Blairite candidate in the 2015 Labour leadership election, got shown exactly what the public thought of Blairism back then by only getting 4.5% of the vote, as Jeremy Corbyn absolutely trounced her, of course. Yet the guy who ran her campaign, Morgan McSweeney, learned a little bit from it, so that when he ran Keir Starmer's leadership campaign, for one, his presence should have set off immediate alarm bells, but for 2, we should not actually be too surprised they went down the road of pretending to be into Corbyn before veering straight back to their preferred Blairism, when the membership had already been tricked into backing Starmer and the damage was done, and it was too late. They don't want to work for us, this lot. They want to be just another establishment party waiting for their turn in power. Anywhere this McSweeney fella turns up, seems pretty clear it isn't going to be good for us. Well, Kendall has now been put in charge of the Department for Work and Pensions. How wonderful! So she's now going to be coming for the long-term sick and disabled. How do I know this? Well, one of the reasons she bombed in the 2015 leadership election campaign was because she was the only Labour candidate backing Tory cuts to social security at that point. And she backed the imposition of the Tory benefit cap, which has caused so much poverty, particularly in London, with the higher cost of living generally there, but of course everywhere else as well. Her reasoning then was because she couldn't see how she could oppose it without showing how an alternative could be paid for. Literally, as soon as she was appointed in this new post by Starmer, she was on the BBC, and after she was Work and Pensions Minister after the next election, why wouldn't she commit to free school meals for children? And again, she came out with, because if you make a commitment, you need to show how you will pay for it. Fine then, show us how you're going to pay for it then, Liz. That doesn't mean you shouldn't though, should it? Like all Tories, she hides behind a myth of we're broke, we can't afford it, despite being, apparently, one of the richest countries on earth. Tax the rich then. Clearly they're the ones who have all the money because we don't have it, do we? No, sorry. The boss has ruled that out. We can't impose any new tax rises on anything anymore. Can't help you, sorry. That's what a vote for Labour and a Liz Kendall-run DWP will get you. Nothing but more misery. Hilary Benn, sadly, isn't his father, isn't remotely close, unfortunately. It's no wonder but Turner is so excited by his reappearance in Cabinet. Now he's been given the Shadow Northern Ireland brief. But Turner's just wars comment might have been made with Bomber Ben in mind, as he voted to go to war in Iraq and made a bonkers speech advocating the bombing of Syria during Corbyn's leadership, causing damage as it did to both the Syrian people and to Corbyn's leadership, which was, of course, the intent. Naturally, once all that was said and done, though, he never mentioned it again. Pat McFadden is now the party campaign coordinator. This guy was literally Tony Blair's former political secretary, and now he's running the election for the party, in effect. I wonder how he'll choose to do that. I can't possibly imagine. Starting with a rousing turn of things can only get better by any chance. Not with you lot in charge, it won't. Things will stay the bloody same. But for all of the promotions, those being demoted, they're looking at too. Lisa Nandy, for some bizarre reason, she keeps getting referred to as left-wing in the media. Well, compared to some of these other shits, she probably is. That doesn't make her left-wing at all. Just less right-wing than they are. Not right-wing enough. Blairite light, maybe. Soft left, they call her. Her own father called her right-wing for a start. And who can forget her comment regarding Jeremy Corbyn that we will break him as a man, which he doesn't much like his brand of actual left-wing politics. Anyway, karma's come for her, in my opinion. The word is Starmer wanted her ditched completely, but instead she got shadow cabinet post for international development, which is rather a joke because there's no longer a department for international development. Therefore, she's been demoted to shadowing a position that doesn't exist anymore. And she took it. Jonathan Ashworth is another one that's getting a dose of karma too. I'm being demoted from the DWP to make room for Liz Kendall. That's got to hurt. He's now Shadow Paymaster General. That's where he's now gone. And then there is Starmer's eternally unmovable problem that is Angela Rayner. He can't get rid of her. She's elected. But she's now shadowing Michael Gove, the Shadow Levelling Up brief, which is pretty much the political equivalent of being the school milk monitor now. The fact she is also now officially Shadow Deputy Prime Minister is just a titular sweetener for effectively sidelining her. What Starmer has done is, without exception, stack his front bench overwhelmingly full of right-wingers. He's stuck with Rayner as the token lefty. He can't do anything about that. If you even believe she still is one, which, to be quite honest, I find debatable. But everyone else is absolutely anything but. This is an attempt at resurrecting Blairism on steroids, no question. Bringing it back into power in the belief that it makes you electable. But the election lead Labour currently enjoys is completely built on the Tories losing ground, not Labour winning it. Blair back in his day had a much broader church going into 1997, and the landslide he then won. He had John Prescott there, he had Robin Cook there, he had a few others, but Starmer, no, he doesn't want any of that. The other thing Blair had going for him was a personality. Whether you like him or you hate him, he did have that. Starmer doesn't. He's less lifelike than Pinocchio, and a lot less honest too. And he is to charisma what Albert Steptoe was to sex appeal. He's offering no hope, which Blair did, even if he didn't mean it. He has a cabinet now bereft not only of talent, but empathy and of moral scruples, and are in it for personal gain, as all Tories are. But he's also alienating more and more of the voter base. The left are largely gone, binning off not so much the soft left, but soft right, which you can quibble about as a definition as well, if you like, but it's more honest than the media are being about it. But by sending them packing too now, or demoting them, by abandoning serious areas of social concern, such as mental health, they are refusing to provide answers to the problems we face, as shown by Kendall's refusal to apparently stand or do anything, because apparently there's no money for it. And if John McTiernan's crowing about just wars is anything to go by, they'll soon find money for that. This is a statement from Starmer that he expects to win the next election, that it's already in the bag, and can already get away with showing what an absolute shit he'll be in power. The arrogance is obvious to me. Blair got away with this too. He lost ground at each election he was in power for, but by and large it didn't matter with him because the Tories were led by absolute weaklings such as Ian Duncan Smith or William Hague. Starmer doesn't see it, but political diversity has grown since. He's getting pinched hard, not by the Tories, but by the Greens across the country. The local elections showed that. And if he thinks people will just keep on looking between his party and the abject cruelty of the last Tory administration should he become Prime Minister, I think he's going to be in for one heck of a shock. I think if he is as truly awful as I fully expect him to be, more people will be waking up to the fact that this duopoly between Labour and the Tories, where nothing changes, has to end, and a third option to rally around must be found. And that isn't going to be the Lib Dems, who have just enabled this pro-establishment farce to persist, just taking advantage of whichever party seems to be gaining the most ground. I believe the Green Party are far and away best placed to gain the actual ground needed. But what do you think? Impressed by this reshuffle, or is it as bad as you expected? Any good picks from amongst it, do you think? And why would that be? Do you reckon he's going to be as bad as Blair? Do you think he could be better? Or could he possibly be even worse? Let me know in the comments. Have your say and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where, for as much as polling points to a Labour landslide, recent by-elections show that where Labour are being expected to win, they aren't necessarily doing so. And not just at parliamentary level, but local level too. There's a Liverpool by-election going on right now. Anything in Liverpool, you would by and large expect Labour to win, but things are not looking peachy at all for Team Keith in what is supposed to be the reddest city in the country. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, really isn't the sharpest tool in the box, and in what is probably one of the single most tone-deaf, off-the-cuff comments I've ever heard in my life, I think, in light of the mess our schools and other public buildings are in, thanks to this aero bar concrete so many were built out of, she actually moaned about not getting praise for doing a good job. Good job of what? Presiding over the ministerial equivalent of taking a JCB to our schools? It's like you built schools out of Mentos and then poured Coke all over the top of them. Keegan has got caught in the same way so many politicians have been in the past, by neglecting to check if they're still being recorded audially or visually after an interview, where she was being interviewed by ITV News in relation to this concrete problem. RAAC, RAAC as it's called, reinforced aerated autoclaved concrete it stands for, or concrete with air holes in it, in plain English. After saying all schools will be fixed, she thought the cameras were off and the recording devices were off as she was removing her mic. She decided to suddenly spout out of nowhere, does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done an effing good job because everyone else has sat on their asses and done nothing? No signs of that? No. No, Gillian. No. There's no signs of that. Because if you think you've done an effing good job, you've got another thing coming. You are to doing a good job what stormtroopers are to pinpoint accuracy. You are to doing a good job what Enoch Powell was to multiculturalism. You are to doing a good job what Theresa May was to strength and stability. You are to doing a good job what Keir Starmer is to lying straight in bed. I can go on all day. The fact is, you've not done a good job. You have stood there on the matter of schools and said that maintaining school buildings is a local authority issue. But they've got to go to you if they want to build anything. It isn't a local authority issue. It is absolutely a national government issue. Local authorities, besides the point, have been starved of cash for years by your government. So even if it was their responsibility, they probably wouldn't have the cash to do it anyway. Also, if Crumbling Keegan was doing such a good job, why did you apparently sign off, though she denies it, on a £34 million refurb of the Department for Education offices when schools were in need of that cash? See, there's always money to be found when they want it, but never where it's needed. Allegedly, she also hid the evidence of the dangers presented by crumbling schools in the hope it would become another government's problem. So that says a lot of their dedication to fixing things, doesn't it? She's done such a good job that she thinks she deserves thanks for that. That when all these stories of crumbling school buildings started getting news coverage, she thought she'd better launch a fact-finding mission into how many schools need help. But guess when she launched it? 8 o'clock in the evening, the night before school started to reopen on Monday. If they've even been able to, of course. But of course, Keegan is just the latest instalment of what has been a known problem for decades now. This rat material was used to whack up quick, cheap buildings, the intention being they'd be temporary, post-war, to get the country back on its feet quickly. Unfortunately, following the Attlee government, you can measure British administrations in different degrees of ignoring this issue of replacing these buildings with the properly built, long-lasted ones that were intended to be built thereafter. Since crap rat carried on being used into the 1990s, it definitely didn't happen, did it? Not least in schools, all contributing to this current concrete crisis. Now, it wasn't until Gordon Brown's administration came along that an attempt to genuinely look at this issue was made. Under Blair, such promises were made and reneged upon. That was his raison d'etre, wasn't it, really? But Brown had committed to building 715 new schools before he lost the election, and pretty much the minute the Tory-led coalition came in, July of 2010, as this was, Michael Gove came along and scrapped the scheme entirely, along with bidding new housing plans, new eco-towns, and the building of new leisure centres and swimming pools. Gove binned the problem off completely, just decided it got to go in the bin, austerity, we need to cut, this can go, despite knowing it was a problem. Because in the name of austerity, the cuts had to be made, and if crumbling Keegan wants to blame someone for having been sat on their arse, perhaps Bob is a good person to start with. It was political choice to ignore this, and schools are now literally falling apart. Kids' education disrupted as 100 schools in this country are told to close already because they're now too dangerous. That is the price we now pay for constantly electing politicians who keep telling us there isn't any money. There is always bloody money. Unfortunately, there are always politicians refusing to take the action necessary and needed. So again, the problem got kicked down the road, and it didn't crop up again until the 2021 spending review, when a chap called Jonathan Slater, the then Permanent Secretary for Education within the civil service, he told the Tories that due to the state of schools by then, between 300 and 400 schools needed to be rebuilt per year because they were crumbling. And that was based on data known about since Brown's plans got binned. And it all got brought up again in data from 2018 as well. Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor at the time, and he said, no, I'm only going to supply funding to rebuild 100 schools. And then the following year, he changed his mind again and decided, no, I can only commit to funding 50 schools. Slater has gone public with this now, such as his disgust, and Sunak is also wanting thanks now for doing a good job. He's now moaning that people are blaming him for the schools collapsing, and whilst it is true it cannot solely be laid at his feet, he very much has been part of the problem. The fact is Sunak and his ilk don't care about state schools falling apart because their kids don't go to them. If you wanted further proof of just how much Sunak doesn't care about your kids and their education and the schools they go to, then how about that time in 2022, just last year, when he donated £100,000 to his own old school of his own money? Private school, of course, naturally, Winchester College. How about the time in 2018 when further reports of the state of our schools came out, when he gave $3 million to his wife's old school of Claremont McKenna in California? How about that time he donated to a local school in his own constituency of Richford a massive £10 House of Commons branded bottle of wine for a raffle? Oh, he did sign it, though, to big up the value just a little bit. Labour, of course, are having a field day with this, and completely justifiably, their party under Gordon Brown were going to start to deal with this crisis. The Tories have been laid bare for their failings. Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak, Gillian Keegan, all of them have had a direct role to play in where we are today here. So, of course, the opposition party will lay into them over this. So what are they going to do to fix them instead, though? Oh, well, we can't fix them. There isn't any money. Stop saying that. That's literally what the Tories have spent 13 years saying. The schools are now falling apart. People are asking, where is our money going when they're seeing this happening? And the simple answer is, the money is there. It just has to be printed off. It's just that neither party has the will to tax the rich to offset that necessary spending. They can't tax us anymore. We've nothing left to give. Thangam Debonair, Starmer's new Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, she went on to Kay Burley's Sky News show and basically said, we don't know what state the economy is going to be in, so we can't commit to building the schools, to which Burley rightly told her, you can't attack the Tories for this when you offer no solutions yourselves. Starmer is so terrified of getting criticised by the Tories for daring to commit to spending on anything that he won't commit to anything. And even if he did, you couldn't trust him to keep his word on it if he did. So what would the Green Party do instead, Damo? You may be wondering at this point, if you're familiar with my content, because I quite often go down this road, and the fact I'm a Green, well, that's kind of why I do. Well, Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer, looking to take Bangam Debonair's Bristol West seat at the next general election, funnily enough, standing against her, has issued a statement saying, "Our education system has been left crumbling after 13 years of Tory austerity, but successive governments have known about the problems with RAAC. Our schools are not fit for purpose. As Chancellor Rishi Sunak decided to axe investment in new schools from 100 to 50, that was despite a Department for Education survey that revealed the need to build 300 to 400 schools. Now, as Prime Minister, he should reverse the decision he made." As far as what the Greens would do on this issue, and you can check out more on the Green Party policy page on its website, always a good place to look, all their policies all in one place, that is to work towards having smaller schools, having smaller class size, because smaller class sizes, better overall results. They want to aim towards an average of 20 kids per class and a maximum of 700 kids per school at secondary levels, with larger schools than that being broken down into smaller communities within the same building, so you get the same effect. The local authorities would have the power again to build new schools as they need of appropriate size. Academies and free schools, which Gove championed at the expense of building and repairing all the mainstream schools at the time the Tories came in, will be phased into local authority control again, and no more will be built because they are not democratic institutions. They're businesses, basically. It's privatised education. Same goes for grammar schools, which are elitist. And as for private schools, they can kiss goodbye to the ridiculous charade of having charitable status and will be treated as businesses as well. School funding will be based on need, and a lot of that right now needs to go into building and repair. The Tories are full of excuses. Labour won't commit to fixing something which just needs to be fucking fixed. So if you need a school to send your kids to that won't come crashing down on their heads, don't vote for the blue Tories and don't vote for the red ones. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Don't forget to drop a comment on this. Have your say on the conversation. Are you raging about this like I am? I sincerely hope so. Tell me all about it. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I covered the backstory of RAAC and how it got to this point in more detail, and the price of Tory tough decisions as we're now paying. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so would you believe there is still more news coming out regarding Sharon Graham's Unite Union and its ongoing insistence that the film Oh, Jeremy Corbyn, The Big Lie, is anti-Semitic and offensive? Well, it's true, and I've actually got a bit of an exclusive on this, so stick with me. This is as hilarious now as it is buzz. This actually feels like it has been prompted by an article recently written in Squawkbox, actually, just a couple of weeks ago, in fact, a publication that really seems to trigger the Graham gang, really quite gets under their skin when they reported on a response from the Cambridge branch of Unite Community complaining about the ban on the use of Unite buildings to both show the film and also to host part of the book launch tour of electronic intifada journalist Asa Winstanley and his new book, Weaponising Anti-Semitism. Now, this elicited a pretty pathetic rote response from the office of Sharon Graham, to whom this had been directly addressed to, but she wasn't available. I wonder if other Unite members remember talk of there being a hotline directed to Graham when she stood for General Secretary. It's funny how that never materialised, isn't it? But at any rate, her number two, Gail Cartmail, issued what was a pretty miserly rote response on behalf of Graham, who was not available, which at the time had added in a mention of Unite's support for the Palestinian cause. Remember that, it's important later. The union has been widely panned for it, though. Well, last night, I was sent a copy of a reply sent to a Unite member, I shan't say any more than that about them, who had taken it upon themselves to, again, like so many other members had, to challenge the union over its ridiculous stance regarding the Jeremy Corbyn Big Lie film. The Unite member simply asked why Unite had banned the film on its premises. This is the reply they got, word for word, from membership services this time, not the office of Sharon Graham, where they had directed their query. And it said, there had been a small number of requests to show the Big Lie film in Unite offices. We have also received concerns that the film has the potential to offend on issues that have proven previously to be extremely divisive. Unite is proudly anti-racist and stands with all minorities in our communities who face prejudice and discrimination. Following the publication of the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report of its investigation into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, on reflection, corrected his initial response to the report: "We must never tolerate anti-Semitism or belittle concerns about it. I regret the pain this issue has caused the Jewish community and would wish to do nothing that would exacerbate or prolong it. To be clear, concerns about anti-Semitism are neither exaggerated nor overstated." Labour List published an article by Paul Mason, a Corbyn supporter, during his period as leader of the Labour Party. It is clear the film Oh Jeremy Corbyn, The Big Lie will offend and rakes up issues that Jeremy Corbyn in his statement addressed. I fully support Keir Starmer's decision to accept all the EHRC recommendations in full, and in accordance with my lifelong convictions, will do what I can to help the party move on, united against anti-Semitism, which has been responsible for so many of history's greatest crimes against humanity. Additionally, Unite has been criticised for not supporting in our offices a book launch. The publicity for the book states how the book shows how Labour's anti-Semitism crisis was manufactured, which again will cause offence. Unite has not banned the film mentioned, nor the book. However, we have declined to use our buildings for its showing and a related book launch. Alongside this, Unite has a long-standing commitment to international solidarity and has for decades supported the Palestinian cause and will continue to do so. No union has done more on Palestinian solidarity than Unite. Most recently, Unite led the parliamentary briefing on the government's restrictions on public bodies, preventing the boycott, divestment and sanctions in respect to the continuing illegal occupation of Palestinian land, the West Bank. This was reinforced by Unite's policy conference held earlier in July. Additionally, the issues covered in this film relate to internal Labour Party matters, and that is not the focus of our union. In this time of a cost of living crisis, rising inflation and interest rates, our union's focus is on the critical fight for our members' jobs, pay and conditions, as well as issues affecting our local communities. Now, thank you for bearing with me while I went through all of that. It was worth reading the whole thing, because word for word, it is identical to the email Gail Cartmel sent to Cambridge Community Branch, except for one subtle change that I picked up on. The line, Labour List published an article by Paul Mason, a Corbyn supporter during his period as leader of the Labour Party. It is clear that the film Oh Jeremy Corbyn, The Big Lie will offend, da-da-da-da-da. Now, in Cartmel's response, they mentioned a Labour List article, but not which one, nor by whom, merely stating they had drawn a conclusion from it. But now we have the instance where the word of one journalist is being taken as gospel, whereas the writing of another, Asa Winstanley, has been banned. Because no matter how much you deny banning the film or the book, if you won't allow them in your buildings, then you have banned them. Why is one journalist's words worth more than another? And not to slight the Winstanley issue one iota, but the Unite member who sent this query didn't actually ask about that. They only asked about the film. So it shows how lazy Unite are being in responding to members' concerns about this. So why is Mason, though, more highly regarded than Winstanley? Unite state that Mason was a Corbyn supporter during his tenure as Labour leader, and I'd argue, sure, but as much as Keir Starmer was. So I thought I'd have a quick look at some of what Mason has been saying about the left lately, which is what Unite claim he was a supporter of. If he genuinely supported Corbyn, he'd still have those same left-wing ideals and ideas and standards you would imagine if he was the credible sort. Well, this Saturday coming, there is the launch of the big Stop Starmer event, organising resistance to the red Toryism, dishonesty and purging Starmer's brought in since he became leader. There's a piece in the Morning Star about it today, and Mason has sneered, in a rare moment of honesty, Putin's stooges inside the left explain exactly what they are trying to achieve, a Tory victory. I'd humbly suggest that's exactly what you're trying to do, Paul. A red Tory victory, which the left no more wants than a blue Tory victory, but you will do you in your typical insulting manner. His Twitter timeline at the moment is just a litany of retweets from Starmer-oid MPs and the main Labour Party account, and he has been desperate to become a Labour MP, having applied literally all over the country and failing because nobody wants him. Even left-type journos, who often make you wonder whether they are at times, can't stand him. Aaron Bastani of Novara Media has called him as politically coherent as a wet flannel, and Owen Jones, in a span on social media, told him he'd sold out everything he believed in by blindly cheerleading for a leadership which holds him in contempt. The Labour List article Mason wrote is rancid, frankly, to my mind, and was written ahead of the intended showing in Glastonbury, which, of course, got cancelled. So before a great many people had a chance to watch it, in fact. And in fact, Mason's review made a lot of people wonder if he himself had genuinely watched it. He claims the film conflates Zionism, Jews and Israel. It does not. The film is about how Corbyn rose and fell, and those operating behind the scenes that engineered that. Not just on the issue of anti-Semitism either, but on a great many other issues, not least the behaviour of numerous individuals at Labour HQ. Now, Mason rubbishes the film because of who it features. People, notably several Jewish people who had been expelled, because sure, the moves against Corbyn weren't solely aimed at him, but about destroying everything he stood for. And those supporting that, Jackie Walker, Graham Bash, Tony Greenstein, all get a mention by Mason in this article. He also complains about a montage of those who helped contribute to bring Corbyn down, such as the Conservative, largely Jewish Board of Deputies, the Jewish Labour movement, where you need neither be Jewish or a Labour member to join, Labour Friends of Israel, or rather Labour Friends of an Apartheid State, as it would better be called. How does that one square with Unite's commitment to Palestinians then, Sharon? I'm frankly equally appalled and amazed that Labour List even published what is an incredibly one-sided article launched basically in defence of Mason's new idol, Keir Starmer, and the justification of his treatment of Jeremy Corbyn by undermining the film, which spells out the truth of the matter. That's my opinion of the Mason article. Please do read it yourself if you haven't already and draw your own conclusions from it. Know your enemy, as I always like to say. But above all else, watch the film as well, though, and see if you think that article is right or wrong. Now, I've set out my stall here, but that Unite have taken Mason's word as gospel and justification for their actions is just horrifying. That a guy like Mason, rude in his social media responses, overtly pro-Starmer, bringing into question his left credentials, and if he still sees himself as a socialist by supporting Starmer, well, frankly, that should ring alarm bells for anyone. If you think Starmer is a socialist still, then he's a bigger chump than I previously thought. Contrast that journalism, though, with Asa Winstanley. He's not a mainstream journo, therefore he might as well have leprosy as far as British media discourse goes. But he's easily one of the most professional, thorough and diligent investigative journalists we have in the UK today. And Unite's claims of being pro-Palestinian are also cast into heavy doubt by banning his book launch, because there are few journalists who have written more and spoken out more in the name of the Palestinian cause, which Unite claim to support. He's literally been going to Palestine and seeing it for himself for nearly 20 years. He's volunteered with the International Solidarity Movement, again, something that Unite says it supports, in the West Bank. Again, Unite mentioned that in their email. I can only speculate, frankly, on some of the things Asa Winstanley will have seen with his own eyes. And it's a testament, actually, to Jeremy Corbyn and his ardent opposition to the weaponisation of anti-Semitism and his support for the Palestinian cause, being the first mainstream political leader in years to raise the issue of that Palestinian plight and the apartheid state of Israel and thrust it into focus. That a man like Winstanley, with all of his experience of life in Palestine, not only took on the smears and accusations against Corbyn and the left more widely, but literally wrote a book on it. A book Unite have banned from being launched at their property in Bristol. So there's their solidarity for you. That Unite are still pushing this lazy one-size-fits-all response to queries about the film, though, is an insult to members angered by their union's actions. But to try and enhance their reasoning and their response by now naming Paul Mason in their response, and his article as part of their justification, makes the entire response to me a really sick joke now. Unite under Sharon Graham claiming Starmer is on notice, but the only notice he's going to be taking, actually, is how happy Unite are to functionally be on side with him in how they're acting and responding on this issue, certainly. Few people are as ardently supportive and loyal to Starmer these days than Paul Mason is. Like I said earlier, he's desperate to be a Labour MP. But if he was such a Corbyn acolyte, how come he turned down the chance to stand in his home constituency of Lee during the Corbyn years? All because apparently he was putting on a play there. A play where he was literally the only person in it. I'll be very interested to read your thoughts on this, folks. Many thanks to the chap who sent this email response in and has helped me to expose this. Delighted to be able to raise further important questions of the Unite leadership, frankly. It's my union, I want to know too. And indeed, if you could ask Sharon Graham or any other Unite officials about this, what would you ask them right now? Does citing Paul Mason undermine Unite, or do you think he's credible and wrote a valid piece? Have you seen the film yet? If not, get onto platformfilms.co.uk to find showings near you, and absolutely get your hands on a copy of Asa Winstanley's book, Weaponising Anti-Semitism too. It is an excellent piece, and before social media platforms, certain ones, berate me, I'll throw in that no, these are not paid endorsements, just genuine, appreciative ones. Do leave a comment and have your say on this, though, and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation, which I suppose the question will be, will Unite ban this too? Well, they may well end up featuring it, and in not such a good light, as the Corbyn film is set to get a sequel before this year is out even. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so it's becoming a familiar occurrence to see a Labour parliamentary candidate selection be just accompanied by the sight of parachutes in the sky, swinging in, carrying Starmer's chosen candidates for local Labour to choose from amongst, because they're local people that they might want. They simply won't do. They might be socialists, you see. Ooh, they might actually want to offer hope or change to people. They might not want to be a Tory B team candidate. And indeed, the Labour members in their area may not want a Tory B team candidate. So Starmer and co make sure they can only choose from people they've already picked, you see, so as to deliver the army of yes men at the next election that Team Keep want. Well, it hasn't gone their way exactly in Wales. Before I go any further, I'm going to apologise in advance for any mispronunciations on the way, because Damo's doing a Welsh story again. I get picked up on my pronunciations of these places every single time, so I'm heading it off right now before we start. Right? Good? Are we ready? Okay. So we're in Carmarthen, I can say that one. And the local favourite to be selected for Labour to stand for Parliament is a chap called Rob James, who happens to also be the opposition leader on Carmarthen County Council. So a significant local politician, all to the good for the Labour Party, you would think. Dude, you silly. Team Keith, it would appear, don't like him. And they got a properly pathetic reason for trying to get Rob James off the ballot. It all concerns a text message. The allegation is that James sent a text message in reference to the Llanelli, member of the Senedd and Welsh Deputy Climate Change Minister, Lee Waters, earlier this year, when the topic of second homes in Wales was a key topic of debate. The allegation is that Rob James sent a text message to an unspecified person saying, if you want to cause some trouble today, you may want to point out in the second home debate that the MS for Llanelli has 2 second homes in Carmarthenshire and doesn't live in either of them. Now, if this were a falsehood, then you could understand this being a disciplinary issue, perhaps. Arguably, someone who lies isn't a good fit to be a parliamentary politician, though the message is hardly abusive. It's not like Christian Wakeford calling Angela Rayner a see you next Tuesday by text message, is it? But then he's still allowed to stand for an MP because he was a former Blue Tory. But then Labour is also led by Keir Starmer, of course, who lies like a rug. He lies like a rug made out of a bearskin from a bear that Starmer might have claimed to have shot himself, despite a label on the rear left paw saying 100% faux fur made in Taiwan. That kind of a liar. Anyway, the text message I'm informed is actually wrong, because I'm told that Lee Waters allegedly has 4 homes, not 2. He just happens to have 2 in Llanelli, and the other 2 are in Penarth. He has formally denied having 3 homes, which isn't, of course, denying having 4. But obviously that is alleged. So what we have here is a member of the Senedd, though, for Labour, undermining the argument over second homes, it would appear, and the accusation is that the Carmarthenshire County Council opposition Labour leader has attacked one of his own party over this issue of second homes. Here's the thing, though. Nobody, including the Labour Party, can prove Rob James sent the text. James himself has not admitted to having done so. He said he can't remember ever having sent such a message. Nonetheless, despite being unable to prove any wrongdoing whatsoever, Labour have blocked James from standing on the basis that it would risk reputational damage for the party. Yet he can stay leader of the opposition at County Hall, though. Doesn't seem to make sense to me. Well, however this situation might look to you, local members are smelling an all too familiar Starmer-shaped rat around this, have seen what has happened in so many other constituencies around the UK, and they've said, no, we are not having this, with one member saying, what has happened is outrageous and very unfair. It's appalling that Welsh Labour is trying to stop local members deciding who their candidate can be. They're pretty justified in it too. James got all the branch nominations from every single branch in the constituency. He's led the Labour group for 6 years, meaning he's a Corbyn-era leadership candidate, having come into the opposition leadership role, and that likely speaks volumes over this entire affair. He got shortlisted, though. He got on the selection ballot even. And then all of a sudden, this text message story came out. Oh, very convenient. Little bit late to be comfortable, though, for the right-wingers who might be trying to make some political capital out of this. Because, of course, the postal ballots will have already been sent out, and people will have already cast votes in favour of Rob James, even as officials try to get him disqualified. And as such, when it came to that selection meeting and Labour members could vent their spleens at said officials, vent their spleens they did, a motion ended up being passed to abandon the entire proceeding. Members flat refusing to select anyone. And this is quite an event because, as Michael Crick has noted on his Tomorrow's MP's Twitter account, this is the first successful revolt against a candidate selection for either Labour or the Tories. The Carmarthen East and Dinfowr Labour Party Twitter account responded in kind saying, This is welcome news. Members in Carmarthenshire must be allowed to democratically and fairly elect the candidate that we believe in. We do hope Welsh Labour is listening. Well, indeed. What will happen next then? Still unknown at this point, but locals have made it clear they want Rob James, left-leaning and popular, to be their candidate, and they don't appear to be prepared to take no for an answer on this. Imposing someone from centralised Labour somewhere, well, centralised Welsh Labour or Westminster, even London Labour imposing things, seems likely given how the Starmer regime tends to conduct itself. But like we've seen elsewhere, angering local members means they won't campaign, they won't door knock, they won't leaflet, and they won't vote. It's a dangerous, arrogant gamble that Starmer keeps playing up and down the country that polling doesn't reflect. And I'd like to believe that will cost him dearly in the long run. He deserves to be punished for how he's conducting himself and how these candidacies are being conducted. Solidarity to Carmarthen Labour, thanks for making a stand. I hope it inspires others to do likewise rather than accept just another parachute being inflicted upon them, particularly when done on the weakest and most spurious of reasons, as this one seems to be. What do you reckon, though? Are Labour right to take Rob James out despite having no proof of wrongdoing? Are they justified in imposing their will as they do, or is it not worth the risk when they want to win power? Are they overreaching? Will they pay a price for these ongoing attacks on local members at the ballot box, or will the arrogance being shown not matter in the long run? Let me know in the comments, be part of the conversation, share your thoughts with me. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where boundary changes have been used as an excuse to eliminate another Welsh lefty from the parliamentary Labour Party ranks. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer is determined to use British steel, to build British ships, British stuff for British people. Grr. So he says. That's the mantra. But perhaps somebody ought to point out to him that British Steel has ceased to exist as a truly British entity, and did so a long time ago. So is he lying, just ignorant, or is he pulling the wool over our eyes once more? Why, choose, frankly. British Steel was one of many public assets not nailed down that the Tory government of Margaret Thatcher flogged off back when she was in power in 1988 in this instance, by which point it had actually doubled production since 1979 when Thatcher came in, was turning a profit, which being a nationalised service as it then was, meant there was cash to be sunk back into delivering a better service, all in the national interest, and would have cost us all far, far less to produce. Brilliant stuff, great news for Great Britain. Therefore, naturally, the Tories felt shareholders should get all that money instead of us and the country, and sold it all behind our backs, all very sneakily. Because what they did with British Steel was very similar to what they did with our water companies, which was to change the British Steel Corporation, as it was, the nationalised industry, into British Steel plc, a private company with all assets, goods and chattels being transferred to this, and then along came the investors to stick their money into it. The trouble with private companies, though, is that they can be bought and sold, broken up, taken over, and come 1999, British Steel plc ceased to exist, as it then merged with a Dutch company which I cannot pronounce, and I'm not going to attempt to. But once the merger went through, it all became the much more easy to pronounce Chorus Group. So now our steel industry at this point was half owned by Denmark, in effect. Chorus itself, however, then got taken over in its entirety in 2007 by the Indian steel conglomerate Tata Steel, far better known. You would have heard of them in the news, no doubt, who have been in and out of the news a lot in recent years, chiefly for threatening to abandon its British sites unless the government stump up public cash, our money, for them. British Steel is really Indian steel, therefore, whether it is manufactured here or not. There is, it should be noted, another company called British Steel again now, and it has existed since 2016, when Tata sold off a steel plant in Scunthorpe to investment company Grable Capital, and thus we had a British private steel manufacturing base. Called British Steel, we had British Steel back again, but it was a private company. And then history repeated itself again just 4 years later, as this was then acquired by the Chinese Jingye Group in 2020, so that was the end of that. But of course, that is what Starmer is really driving at. And equally why Tata get away with fleecing all of us. Having our own steel manufacturing capability is a critical infrastructure issue. Not only is it of higher quality than cheaper Chinese steel, as a for instance, that steel manufactured in China itself, not in Scunthorpe, incidentally, But without steel, we wouldn't be able to build any warships, let alone anything else we use steel for in construction, repair industries, car manufacture, and more and more and more. And actually, when you bring up the prospect of warships, you can appreciate our national defence actually hinges upon it. And such is why when Tata and indeed Xingye can show up on the government's doorstep, they seem to be able to get away with acting pretty much like a bunch of bailiffs when it comes to demanding money in order to carry on. So we have an industry we rely on for our security that we don't own, that was stolen from us effectively by the Tories, that the companies that do own them know we don't own and are reliant on still, and can therefore pretty much hold us to ransom. The issue with Tata Steel itself goes back to 2015 when they decided to sell off assets here in the UK. Not least, they tried to sell off the largest works in the country in South Wales, Port Talbot. Obviously, they sold the site in Scunthorpe around this time successfully, but come 2020, Tata wanted £500 million off the government in the form of a coronavirus rescue package as the pandemic saw steel demand drop, which 8,000 jobs hinged on. Now, private company, why should we, as a state, have to bail out such a company? But because we're utterly reliant on that steel being produced here, of course we paid it. Now they want another £500 million. And each and every time they want money, the threat of closure is used. And it works. This time they want us to pay for them to upgrade their furnaces to the greener electric arc versions in order to reduce carbon emissions. So we can meet our net zero total. They want the state to pay for their new furnaces. But they still also want to shed another 3,000 jobs whilst they're at it at this point. Meanwhile, up in Scunthorpe, also in the name of decarbonisation, the government has set to hand Xingye £300 million as well to do likewise. They are currently waiting on a commitment from them to save jobs. Well, what about Tata then? It is bloody ridiculous. We're throwing so much public money at these private companies. Notice we can find it here, by the way, for this. The money's there for this. But again, the argument has to be, why are we spending so much on something that is not a public asset? This is a sticking plaster solution, as the Brill-creamed one would say, until the next time these companies threaten closure unless we cough up more public cash for something else. All of this was stolen from us by Thatcher. We should be demanding it all back. Legislate it back into public ownership. It'll cost a lot less in the long term. Our dependence on steel, having steel manufactured in this country, though, that's not going to go away. And it shows how these companies, get away with what they're doing. And Starmer cheering British steel used for warships, well, that should bother us for several reasons. Firstly, he's telling these companies we'll be increasingly reliant on them, giving them even more leverage, because he won't commit to renationalisation anymore either, so giving them the green light to carry on extorting cash from all of us via the public purse. Secondly, if anyone was in any doubt about Starmer's dedication to Blairism, citing warships as the first thing that comes to his mind for reliance on steel should have klaxons going off in your head, wondering who the idiot is going to invade should he reach power, and add in news today that he's abolished the post of Shadow Minister for Peace and Disarmament, and you should be all the more concerned about this man and his potential warmongering. Why is house building not his main driver? Scunthorpe, for example, is a plant that produces long steel products, RSJs, railway sections, that kind of thing. They supply steel to the construction industry, not the plate steel required in, say, shipbuilding and repair, which is my old industry, my old trade. I know a thing or two about such things. So this British Steel Chinese-owned company doesn't supply steel for warships then. Whoops, Keith, you might have told a fib again about that, or did you not know? What he's on about is importing less steel, in effect. But it is still public money going to foreign-owned companies that just happen to operate in the UK, operate something essential to our infrastructure, when Starmer dishes out new defence contracts. Keith has said, we've got new frigates being built ready for 2027. The percentage of British steel in that is 4%. We would change that. I went to Scunthorpe to the steelworks up there a couple of months ago. The workforce up there are determined to go to green steel. They just need a government that actually backs them in achieving that. They know that their own jobs and those of the next generation are bound up in having a government that actually has the foresight or strategic thinking and is going to put its shoulder to the wheel of making sure that we have a steel industry of the future. Okay, So first, what do you mean by British Steel here? Because if you mean British owned, as is the implication, as indeed the name of the Chinese owned company is meant to imply, then the answer is 0%, because there's no such thing, it does not exist. If you mean what percentage of the steel in these frigates is made by said company in Scunthorpe only being 4%, that might well be true, because the vast majority of the steel used will be plate steel, which they don't produce, so is either imported or comes from one of Tata Steel's plants, in which case you're misleading people again. If you want 100% British steel being used, then we need to have British-owned British steel back. We need to be renationalising, so we actually do have a steel industry of our own again, because the fact is, we don't. If anything, the companies that do own our steel infrastructure consistently remind us that we don't, by knocking on the door, dressed up like a bunch of heavies, and essentially saying, pay up, or we're going to sack a lot of people and collapse your steel-making capabilities. It is, in my opinion, a matter of national security that we renationalise this. What do you think? Am I jumping the shark on this, or do you see a danger here too? What do you make of the government cowering and opening the purse strings to these companies time after time in the manner that they do, that is demanded of them? Do you believe Starmer in his devotion to British steel, or will cheap Chinese stuff imported be more within the fiscal rules and more in keeping with Starmer's typical level of honesty? Let me know in the comments below. Have your say and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's our video recommendation where, despite the fact Labour can't see the wood for the trees on steel, they can see the failure in gas, particularly gas storage, but not because they're going to renationalise that either, not because they're going to fix it and rectify it, but merely because they found another stick to beat the Tories with and score some points on them. And, well, I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so there's a lot of excitement coming from the Starmeroid camp in Scotland at the moment, do you know? They're all at the site of a Redfield-Wilton poll that shows the SNP and Scottish Labour tied on 35% each. Close stuff. But it's misleading. And as much as Labour might be cheering this, it's false economy, actually, for them to get so excited based on these numbers. Yet, of course, that is exactly what they are doing, and their loyal media to boot. Scottish Labour have their finger on the pulse, not by pointing to this poll and saying it's all to play for at the next general election. Only Labour can boot out the Tories and deliver the change Scotland needs, because your main rivals in Scotland are the SNP guys, but they aren't exactly in touch with reality here. For one, all polls like this have a 3% margin of error, and the SNP are down 2 points with Labour up 1. So all within margin of error. But the Tories are also down 2 points, so who is Labour gaining from here? I suggest it was the Tories, since the Scottish Greens are up 2 points themselves, and given that they're in a joint administration with the SNP right now, it's likely just churn between those two parties. Labour are, I would suggest, gaining from the Tories, the other point the Tories lost going to the Lib Dems. So this is just churn between establishment parties, lending weight to SNP MP Chris Law's caustic comment at PMQs yesterday, which earned him a barking at by the eternally useless Speaker Lindsay Hoyle when he referred to the Tories and Labour as two cheeks of the same arse in the Commons. Delightful to see. But there is also the aspect of how this poll translates into seats, and the brilliant Lefty Stats account has crunched the polling numbers and spat out the predictions as far as retaining control of the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood is concerned. And with 129 seats there up for grabs, and 65 therefore needed for a majority, the SNP would retain 55 seats there, losing 9. However, the Scottish Greens would have 15, which is an increase of 7. Therefore, with a net loss of just 2 seats in this SNP Green coalition arrangement, they'd still retain control with a combined total of 70. Labour would gain 13 seats on these numbers, putting them on 35, but it would be to no avail. And it would be pretty much exclusively at the expense of the Tories, who are predicted to lose 15 seats. So despite those headline figures, and despite the SNP and Labour tying in that poll, Labour are eating into the Scottish Tory vote. They are not eating into the SNP vote. If anything, the Scottish Green partners of the SNP are eating into the SNP vote at the moment. And this is also a pretty severe indictment of Labour. The SNP have been besieged with issues in recent months, as you've no doubt been aware if you've been coming across the stories in the news. The media onslaught against Nicola Sturgeon and her husband amidst a police probe, you would think would make the SNP extremely vulnerable right now. Sturgeon's replacement, Humza Yousaf, hasn't exactly got off to a flying start either, yet that same media are trying to sell us a vision of a Labour resurrection that really isn't apparent when you drill into the data. But this is just one poll, Damo, and you can't trust them. And this is often true. I can hear you saying, certainly it is better to look at polling trends, and based on changes since last month across other polls, the SNP is actually up 3 points to 39%, and Labour is down 2 points on 30%. So is that to consider. But let's look elsewhere to see how not so well Labour are actually doing in Scotland right now, because we've got a by-election underway. We're in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. So we've got an idea of just how voters are thinking, and we'll soon know when these results come out as to what the voting intention really does legitimately look like in a Scottish constituency. We don't have to have this guessing game with polling numbers anymore. But this by-election has come about as a result of a recall petition in former SNP MP Margaret Ferrier, and that was triggered after she boarded a train despite having tested positive for COVID. Naughty, naughty. She's been punished for it. She's been recalled. It's triggered a by-election. And you would think the SNP would be in trouble again here. You would think their name would be mud right here and now there. You would think Labour would have a stonking chance. And indeed, Labour former campaign coordinator, now reshuffled to Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, Shabana Mahmood, has been deployed along with activists from England to try and get out the vote, showing just how desperate Starmer is to demonstrate that he's making inroads into Scotland from a Westminster perspective. Now, at the end of August, so bear in mind those Holyrood figures as compared to those Westminstery ones, Labour was leading the SNP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, with Labour polling on 47.9% and the SNP down on 35.7%. But just 8 days on, the lead has been slashed, with Labour now on 45.8%, but the SNP up to 43.4%. That's beyond margin of error. So still very much game on here. If Labour are on their way to power, be it in Scotland or nationally, they shouldn't be struggling against an SNP that has been scandalised both at Holyrood and at this constituency level. If that is what we're seeing, the Starmer effect, as so many people call it, it's like the Lynx effect, but only if Lynx produced deodorant that smelt like a rancid bin bag. I'm sure that plays its part. Scottish Labour leader Asa Winstanley is also about as likeable as a bin bag and no more competent on media rounds than Starmer is. And this actually exposes a really big problem for Labour in Scotland, because come a general election, Starmer won't be able to bus extra hands to Scottish seats like this, like he's been doing, that he's struggling to take at a time when he has that luxury at the moment. In fact, it's not even that big a luxury when you consider how many activists and supporters and members he's driven away. They're becoming a lot harder to find, let alone to bus around the country. And come a national ballot, when everywhere is voting and electing and campaigning, on the ground support, or the lack of it, is going to hurt Labour a lot going forward to the general election. Driving away activists will have been his biggest mistake ever. I am certain of it. His own arrogance and belligerence will have done him in for it, and couldn't have deserved it more. He'll have to have some policy positions by then as well. And going by what he's saying and doing now, they're pretty much guaranteed to be as Tory light as they come. Hardly appealing stuff. The SNP are currently championing rent controls in this by-election. That's as far away from Labour and Tory policy on housing as you can get right now, when both parties are more keen to protect buy-to-let landlords and reliant on ordinary people not helped by that to still vote for them, stupidly, in my opinion. Not only will Starmer have to appear on TV as well to answer questions live in debates, unless he chickens out like Theresa May did, of course, but so will an Asa Winstanley, and they're both horrible, horrible live orators. Also, there's a question of competence. Right now, Labour councillors on South Lanarkshire Council, on the patch of Rutherglen and Hamilton West, are at each other's throats over Labour business getting aired publicly, where one councillor was stripped of several of her duties. She kicked off publicly, and now her colleagues have come out swinging against her, all whilst this by-election is going on. Nothing like that to show the people of the constituency how competent and able your party is there? Then there's the Labour candidate themselves for that seat, a chap called Michael Shanks, who appears to now be singing from the Rejoin Europe hymn sheet, despite having claimed in a now deleted tweet from 2014 that anyone resigning a local party position over the question of Europe was lying, leading to accusations of being a flip-flopper on an issue that Scotland overwhelmingly voted to remain on. He's also such a staunch Labour supporter that he quit the party in 2019, citing the then Corbyn approach to Brexit, and also, of course, the anti-Semitism scan as his reasons for doing so. So you can see why Starmer and Sauer quite like him. The SNP may well be a party with serious issues of its own to deal with right now, but with the alternative being Starmer's authoritarian mess of a Labour Party being the only likely other option, the SNP is still very much the best choice for Scotland. And I don't actually think I need to tell too many people in Scotland that. As whatever the headline polls might say, when you dig a bit deeper, you realise most of them seem wise to what a Labour-run administration will mean for them, both in Scotland and for the UK as a whole. Better fit the rest of the UK woke up as much as the Scottish tend to have done. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say in the comments on this and be part of the conversation too. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where it's not just in Scotland that there is candidacy chaos for Labour, but also in Wales, where a selection meeting has just had to be completely abandoned. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks. Right, so James Cleverly, unbelievably, he is still the Foreign Secretary because that's how mad the Sunak government is. That's the level we're at in the lack of talent stakes in government today. He's had a bit of a mare on Sky News this morning demonstrating that he has all the mental gymnastics talent of a dead duck, yet insists on flapping his lips while saying absolutely nothing of note whatsoever. That in itself is a bit of a talent, I suppose, for noise to keep leaving your mouth while contributing the sum total of Jack in the way you're informing those you're addressing. And if the critics accuse me of doing that, well, stuff you. Anyway, this is exactly why they send him out, though. They see him as a good communicator, even though he says absolutely sod all except to blame Labour for everything the Tories have stuffed up over the last 13 years. He's been referred to as an attack dog by Spectator's right-wing scribbler Katie Balls, though I kind of think of him more as the jowly, dribbly sort, salivating at the idea of chasing next door's cat, if that cat were a sad, grey, greasy, whiny creature, possibly called Keith. But when it comes to chasing said creature, the two brain cells said canine calamity is in possession of are too busy fighting over third place, and his legs go in two different directions. That's a James Cleverly interview for you. Number 10's idea of him being an attack dog must come from him trolling people on Twitter, I would imagine, notwithstanding the fact most ordinary people are more than a match for whatever drivel he punches into his phone to put out onto social media. Anyway, he sat down with Niall Patterson this morning on Sky and was confronted on a number of issues, Ukraine, climate change notably. But then the conversation turned to the current scandal / source of embarrassment for the government right now, which centres around the escape from Wandsworth prison of a chap called Daniel Khalife. Now, Patterson asked Cleverly in relation to this, first and foremost, do we have anything in terms of an update that might allay people's fears about the fact that this man remains on the run? Straightforward question. No gotcha there, really. Just update the public, please. But Cleverly isn't there for that. He's there to obfuscate and excuse, and so he responded with, so I don't have an update, specifically on the investigation. Of course, this is an ongoing investigation, at which point Patterson chipped back in. He knew where he was going. That this is a guy, he chipped in, though, that this is a guy who is on remand. He is facing trial. He hasn't been convicted of anything yet. Trying to help Cleverly get to the point, I felt, of actually answering the question. Pretty much all that was being asked at this point was, what do you know? What is the latest? And Cleverly going, don't ask me, Gov, I don't know nothing. However, being a liberal spreader of word salad, that didn't stop Cleverly from carrying on and saying something. And indeed, he did carry on and say stuff. He said, but we are, of course, looking into the nature of this escape. The Conservative government, the Prime Minister, take public safety incredibly important, top priority. We're increasing the number of prison places, prison officer numbers, police officer numbers. We are very, very focused, except on the question, obviously. He really is a master of not answering what he's asked, yet in his dim-wittedness, he just opened up a further can of worms for himself. If public safety is so important, why have you left schools and other public buildings in such a poor state thanks to the RAAC scandal that they're now literally a danger to life? 100 schools being closed on that basis isn't taking public safety seriously, is it, when you've let things get this bad? You've increased prison places, have you? Apparently, yes, by 11,000 places. But, and there's a big but, last June, the Prison Officers Association, the trade union for prison officers, wrote to the prison service, asking about what the possibility of RAAC being found in prison buildings was. We know this concrete crisis goes far beyond just schools, after all. They haven't had a reply on that. All the Prison Officers Association know at this point is that back in May, Prisons Minister Damien Hines asked that all prisons were assessed for RAAC, and no further information on that is coming out either. So, Great if you've increased prison places, James, but if the prison has to close because of RAAC at some point, why are you being so quiet about this? Where are you going to put prisoners then? How about prison officer numbers increasing then? Well, your colleague, the Science Minister, Michelle Donnellan, has been full fact-checked after she claimed the other day on Radio 4 that the number of officers have increased by 20%, when in fact she was lying. And although they have apparently increased, that increase amounts to just 3.2%. Again, if prisons get condemned over their construction, though, what are these officers then? And as for police officer numbers, well, we know what you did there. You claim to have recruited 20,000 new police officers when actually you've recruited 29,000. But when you factor in the fact you got rid of 26,000 police officers in the name of austerity, we've only actually seen a net increase of around 3,000 officers in reality, and you couldn't even get your numbers right. Just be honest with people, and by the way, answer the question you were actually asked, for crying out loud. Well, Niall Patterson, let's come back to him. He wasn't finished at all. He came back cleverly with, this government has sat for 2 years on a report from the Chief Inspector of Prisons which pointed out that the massive problems that there were with overcrowding and understaffing. 4 years on, we've had another prisoner manage to escape. The Chief Inspector said last night Wandsworth Prison should be closed. If we had a school failing pupils as badly as this, it would be closed. A prison is failing the people inside it and indeed the public in Wandsworth and elsewhere. Shouldn't we not consider that as an option? Wowzers, there's a zinger, isn't it? Stick that one in your pipe, Jimbo. Come back on that one. Well, he tried. Cleverly came back with, well, we are updating and modernising and increasing our prison estates. We are looking at 6 new prisons. I wonder if they exist as much as 40 new hospitals do. 22,000 extra prison places. We've already recruited 4,000 extra prison officers, so we're putting numbers to stuff again now. There are another 5,000 to be recruited. Are there really? We're doing those things. It's not an oversight thing. Building new prisons is not a quick fix. Oh, for the love of God, just answer the ruddy question. Patterson cut in. He'd had enough again. You've been saying that since 2010, you've been saying that since 2010, but cleverly was unperturbed. He just carried on. And what have we seen is crime dropped overall by half. Violent crime dropped by 40%. Patterson stopped him again. Get him back on track, Niall, please. He'll just trot out stats all morning otherwise. Back to Daniel Khalife, Niall Patterson said, at which point cleverly suddenly got rather animated and shot out, and prison escapes were 10 times higher prior to us coming into power. Oh, well, that's okay then. You can let people escape prison too, as long as it's not as many as New Labour did. I feel so much safer already. Patterson was equally unimpressed, dryly coming back with, given the nature of the crimes he is accused of, I'm not sure that's the kind of defence I'd be pulling out of the bag right now. Oh, Jimbo, another fine mess you've got yourself into. Cue the Laurel and Hardy music. The interview went on a bit longer, mostly cleverly just avoiding answering anything on it in the name of refusing to speculate. In other words, he doesn't have a Scooby. Now, Labour seeing prison escapes happen on their watch way back when, absolutely condemnable, obviously. But the Tories, after 13 years, can't use what went on before as an excuse for what has happened now on their watch in these intervening years. Daniel Khalife was on remand for terror offences and offences relating to the Official Secrets Act. He's an ex-soldier and works as a computer network engineer in the Royal Signals. He's basically a military-made hacker. He was being held on remand awaiting trial in Wandsworth Prison, accused of carrying out a bomb hoax at an RAF base. He was on remand for eliciting information that could be useful to a terrorist and for gathering information for the same or similar purpose. If you consider his role in the Signals, the work he did that they do in cyber warfare, along with the information he was seeking to obtain and gather and had been trained in order to be able to do so, he could well be a significant threat to national security. Yet he was able to escape Wandsworth by strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery truck, having dressed himself up as a chef. One of the biggest questions that should be asked is why was he even at Wandsworth, given he was on remand for terror-related offences? And that always is supposed to require a maximum security Category A prison stay, like Belmarsh, for example. No room? Well, you could always have freed Julian Assange, and then there might have been space for one more. Potential terrorist versus whistleblowing journalist. That's the Tory priorities choice for you. Anyway, Wandsworth is a Category B prison. High security, yes, sure, but it's not maximum, as terror suspects are meant to be held in. So for all of Cleverly's bleating about prison places, that isn't the whole story, is it? 2 days on, there is absolutely no sign of this guy. The police have only managed to stop the delivery van. They stopped it within an hour, but by the time they had, he was gone. For all of Cleverly's claims of increased prison officers as well, the Prison Officers Association have again waded in and spoken up, saying there were fewer than 100 officers on duty at Wandsworth at the time of the escape. A high-security prison where a minimum of 120 are supposed to be on duty. Staffing levels were down 17%, so is it any surprise there's been an escape? Adding to that the fact Wandsworth is already overcrowded. It's meant to hold 917 prisoners. Instead, it's holding nearly 1,600, minus one now, and the problem gets markedly worse. Understaffing has been blamed, and of course that makes sense when you look at the numbers, and this should put Cleverly's attacks on Labour in the shade, because in 2010, when the Tories came in, there were 24,830 prison officers, according to Statista.com. And today in 2023, there are 22,288. So prison officer numbers have gone down since they came into power. For clarification's sake, the full fact claim numbers that I mentioned before, that they claim that prison officer numbers have risen by 3.2%, that relates to just over the last year. So yes, the Tories are increasing numbers now, but under their watch over the last 13 years, numbers are indeed still down. The damage of austerity here still not fixed. Now, we have the spectre of RAAC in prisons hanging over our heads as well. Already overcrowded as they are, we can't afford to lose a single one of these prisons that the government is keeping very quiet after requesting information on all of this all the way back in May, and we have the potential for an almighty mess on our hands if significant numbers of our prisons, or frankly any of them, are found to have RAAC in them. We aren't safe with Tories running the country. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do leave a comment and share your opinions on this story. Be part of the conversation too. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where perhaps this will be the message to prison officers before long from the Tories, as Suella Braverman has demanded that the police work harder to make up for those numbers shortages that they've got. Just work harder. Well, that's a small problem with that, isn't there? Those numbers that, you haven't got. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the other day I did a video where the Labour right-wingers of Sir Keir Starmer have flown into a racism weaponising rage over the selection by the Green Party of Joe Bird to stand in Birkenhead as their parliamentary candidate against former chair of the Progress faction within the parliamentary Labour Party, right-winger Alison McGovern, and after they'd made sure to deselect the rotten lefty incumbent MP in Birkenhead, Mick Whitley, in order to do that to install McGovern. That a socialist is back on the ballot has them wailing a little bit, and given how much they all say socialists are unelectable, you'd perhaps find yourself wondering what they're making so much fuss about. Surely you aren't afraid, are you? But I also made mention in that video, and the one covering the blatant use of boundary changes as cover to get another socialist Labour MP deselected, that the entire saga was completely avoidable due to the fact Wirral West constituency, just next door to Birkenhead, was being vacated as the incumbent Labour MP there, Margaret Greenwood, was standing down at the next election. So why could McGovern not go there, people asked? Well, indeed, why not? The excuse was she wanted to represent where she lived, and her hometown is now, due to those boundary changes, in Birkenhead constituency. But of her former constituency, this forms just a tiny fraction. So much for her being their representative and the people there being important to her. The truth is probably closer to the fact that Birkenhead is just a lot safer seat. Could Whitley have applied to Wirral West then instead? Well, sure, he could have. He'd likely have stood no more chance of being selected there than he was still to stay in Birkenhead, but he also only wants to represent where he actually lives. He's not prepared to strap a parachute on and stand elsewhere, and fair play to him for that. He wants to represent the people that are where he lives, and that's exactly how it should be. But that does bring us on, inevitably, to a selection process in Wirral West. And in true Starmer fashion, bring on the parachutees. They're coming out of the sky because, God forbid, locals ever be allowed to pick their own representative. Now, there's been issues in Wirral West for months as it happens. Back in May, Wirral West CLP got suspended by the Labour Party without any explanation as to why. There was conjecture, of course. By this point, the CLP knew Greenwood was standing down. The thinking was Starmer and co were getting in quick to impose somebody on them. Boundary changes at that point made people think they were going to get lumbered with Alison McGovern, but she made it clear Birkenhead was her target. This was also right after the local elections, and in a blatant stitch-up on Wirral Council, the Labour group leader had done a deal with the Tories and the Lib Dems to bribe them with senior council positions in order to secure chairmanship for himself and freeze out the Green Party entirely from any areas of responsibility from any senior council roles, including that now Birkenhead parliamentary candidate Joe Bird, out of any positions themselves on the council. The same guy, incidentally, had also been involved in the smears that took place in another Wirral constituency, Wallasey, in order to protect the right-wing MP there, Angela Eagle. You might remember the whole Brickgate episode where she claimed a brick had been thrown through her window despite there being no brick. No involvement by her CLP could be proven, and the entire affair was basically an exercise in helping Eagle avoid a trigger ballot, as her CLP were, to say the least, not very happy with her and were indeed planning one. So a suspended CLP, incumbent MP standing down, Wirral Council full of right-wing alleged Labour people who are actually happy to work with the Tories, run a council with them even. Well, you can imagine the state of the selection for the parliamentary seat in Wirral West then, can't you? Needless to say, no local left-wingers stood a hope in hell, and a shortlist of 4 has been announced, and that list consists of, according to the Wirral Socialist Twitter account, a guy who tried to bridge a council budget deficit by charging the poor for littering, a member of the campaign team of Owen, the ice cream man Smith's failed leadership bid against Jeremy Corbyn, a former Tory council candidate, and someone else also implicated in that Brickgate fiasco in Wallasey. What a choice before them. I can imagine the local CLP members are champing at the bit to get out and campaign for one of them, can't you? Yeah, I'll come back to that one in a minute. Matthew Patrick is the chap, the alleged budget deficit candidate, but bullying allegations made against him are far more well known because he ended up resigning from Wirral Council after they came out. This was back in 2018. So quite the quality candidate to be shortlisted by the NEC. The NEC, of course, not locals, obviously. He denied the bullying allegations were anything to do with his decision to quit. Instead, he said he had a new job in London, which is where he's been ever since. That new job, incidentally, well, he popped up in Hackney not all that long ago on the local campaign forum and was allegedly involved in the selection of councillors there, including a certain Thomas Dewey, who I've covered in other videos, having been selected to stand for and elected to Hackney Borough Council despite being investigated for the possession and manufacture of indecent images of children, which saw him stand down within days of being elected, and recently he was sentenced for that. Arguably, this is the candidate standing in Wirral West with the most baggage. Sue Percy is another candidate. She's the one that stood for the Tories in 2006. So again, blue Tories, red Tories, all completely interchangeable. The blue variety more than welcome in Starmer's Labour. Socialists, not so much. But then that's not exactly news anymore, is it? Jen Thornton is claiming to be from the Wirral, but left for London 20 years ago and has been working for a right-wing Labour MP there. She's also tried already to get selected somewhere else for Clwyd North in Wales. She was on the shortlist there only just back in July. So her home turf of decades ago, Wirral West, wasn't even her first choice. Needless to say, she wasn't selected there. And the final name is Gillian Wood, a Labour councillor, another right-winger. The local CLP, as we've seen across the country, we're having none of this. The Wirral West CLP Twitter account sent out a tweet in the aftermath informing members that due to this factional infliction of right-wing candidates, when local CLP officers and left-wing councillors were left off the shortlist, that no fewer than 10 members of the CLP executive were quitting their roles. Much as we saw happen when Starmer's lot did all of this in Broxtowe, which I've also covered in other videos. The CLP chair, vice chair for membership, treasurer, political education officer, BAME officer, youth officer, joint disability officers, joint secretaries, and a branch treasurer have all quit. This will have massive ramifications. In Broxtowe, for example, they've been unable to get the CLP up and running there, and all this happened with them some 6 months ago. So the same could happen here in Wirral West. An entire CLP paralysed going into a general election, as it would appear, unless there are enough right-wingers prepared to step in. We haven't seen that in Broxtowe. There may not be enough to get this place running here. And indeed, it comes down to a question of experience as well, because the people that tend to run CLPs tend to be some of the more experienced, more active members of the Labour local membership. And you've just seen 10 of them swan off. The Wirral West CLP account on Twitter, incidentally, just after this tweet was sent out, though, mysteriously got disabled. Now, the youth officer has been notably critical in his comments off the back of this. He said, "It is not the duty of a party member to blindly and voluntarily campaign for whoever happens to wear a red rosette on polling day, but it is to campaign for those who would be the best possible representatives for the area. As none of the candidates meet this threshold, I will not be campaigning or endorsing anyone in this selection contest, and I am currently undecided of whether I will vote at all." That's the damage Starmer's Labour are doing locally up and down the country. And I'll keep covering every incident I get wind of like this, because no amount of polling reflects local members who volunteer their time to see the party do well, resigning and downing tools and refusing to campaign. The leadership can impose all the candidates it likes, but they can't force people in those areas to back them or give them their endorsement, support them, and give their free time up to support them when they've been foisted upon them. Wallasey is still saddled with Angela Eagle. Birkenhead are expected to vote in a right-winger and Alison McGovern, having lost their socialist incumbent, and now Wirral West is lumbered with a certain right-wing choice here too, and all whilst the Central Party offers no hope or change, just more Tory misery as well. Solidarity to those in Wirral West who have been shafted like so many others have been now, it's not good enough. And it absolutely is not something that deserves to be rewarded by people still going out and campaigning for them and voting for them. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. What will it take to get Starmer and co to stop behaving like this? Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the Green selection in Birkenhead has indeed had the Labour right having a collective aneurysm. I look forward to seeing who the Greens select in Wirral West. Hopefully, they too will have a socialist still on the ballot to vote for, as Birkenhead does now in Joe Bird. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a great many things in political discourse upset me. In case you hadn't noticed up until now, these vids are called Damo Rants for a reason, after all. But nothing triggers me quite like attacks on benefit claimants, and nobody is quite so blatantly cruel in their glee at doing so, to my mind, than Andrew Pierce, a man who seems to more and more resemble a Game of Thrones White Walker with each passing year as more and more of what passes for humanity leaves his hard-right sneering corpse. This is a guy who seems to derive genuine pleasure out of creating misery for others, a walking, talking hate crime. And he gets paid handsomely for it with his all-too-regular appearances on Good Morning Britain or Jeremy Vine, together with his daily fail column and cropping up in his more natural home of GB News, where the truth, in my opinion, has never stopped them so far. Sir Pierce has gobbed off in his daily fail column that there is an army of shirkers out there claiming sickness benefits, which the British taxpayer is footing the bill for. He said, "You all know who these shirkers are. You know the families. You know where they live. You've seen them drinking their cans of beer late in the morning, fag hanging out of their mouths. They've normally got Sky Sports blaring. How do they pay for that? I'll tell you, through your benefits." He's also complaining that the government are acting too slowly on this, moaning that Rishi Sunak needs to act faster than kicking the can down the road to 2025. He's whined that that's 2 years away. That's too long. The benefit bill is already at a record £26 billion. We're paying in incapacity benefits. Do you know how many hospitals that would pay for? Literally hundreds. Language like this is terrifying people. Terrifying people both who have lived through this shirkers versus workers mantra and mentality under this Tory government before, and are seeing them coming for them again. The migrant bashing, frankly, not landing a target so much anymore. So let's start up another culture war, this time on the disabled or the long-term sick, but also attacking a lot of people who have not been targeted by venomous Tory attitudes like this previously from the self-proclaimed Tory Boy Pierce. One massive reason the bill is up is thanks to the government's mishandling of the pandemic. The desire initially, when seeing this modern-day plague sweeping across Asia and Eastern Europe towards us in the beginning of 2020, the deaths that ensued at that time, and Boris Johnson going, well, let's just take it on the chin. Well, people did die here, so many of them, in fact. But so many of those who survived have been left with long-lasting health issues because of it, long COVID. Unable to work as a result for a variety of different reasons. It's affected so many people in so many different ways. So many of us who were long-term sick or disabled or carers for others who were saying when we came under assault by the Tories to others supporting their mantra at that time, I hope you never get sick yourself. Well, some certainly will have done. And now the Tories are coming for them too, being egged on by a man paid to lie, frankly, to the British people. So let's deal with Pierce directly and what he's saying here. This is a guy who's so dishonest in the bile he is retching up into the public domain, that always rancid Daily Fail he works for. He's more than happy to keep on publishing, but he doesn't even use his own name. For some reason, Patrick Connolly isn't good enough for him. Your mum was Irish. You've a proper Irish name, fella. Why the apparent shame in that? Not Tory enough. He's painting a picture of Benefit Street. His imagery of a typical benefits claimant is straight out of a Channel 5 poverty porn documentary. The reality is you're more likely to find these people queuing up at the food bank these days, along with people who are actually in work, no less, as the benefits paid never go far enough. Many people on benefits are in work, let's not forget that, but the benefits, they were frozen for years in the name of austerity, and they've never caught up. And the cost of living crisis is hitting people living under those means now harder than anyone else, harder than ever before. Oh, they get more money though, some of these, some will say. Yeah, well, some do. They get it for a specific reason as well, to meet their additional needs if they're disabled, or whatever requires having gone through a, in itself, invasive and anxiety-inducing assessment process. That's for their additional needs that you, with your health that you have, don't need. So why are you having a go at them for needing that extra support in order to get by normal life? As things are so many are having to use that additional funding now for food or other bills, and their needs are now going unmet still, because it's still not enough. Tory Britain, the sort of country Andrew Pierce likes. For another thing, as I've often covered here, taxpayers are not footing the bill for this because taxes don't pay for anything. Also, another reason the benefit bill is so high is because they count pension payouts amongst it, just to make it look dramatically worse in the media. How many of you consider the state pension to be a benefit rather than something you've paid into your entire life to look after you in retirement? Well, if the government are prepared to be dishonest about that, why not everything else benefits related as well? Also, if Pierce wants to talk about taxpayers being conned, they should frankly stop buying the Daily Mail, which is infamous for its tax avoidance, not least by its owner Lord Rothermere, who lives in France and has non-dom status for tax reasons. If Pierce was so committed to ensuring a good deal for taxpayers, then he might consider quitting his column, because publishing this in a tax-avoiding hate rag is just peak hypocrisy, let's face it. But let's stick with that notion of tax avoidance a little bit longer as well, by the way, as here's a cunning wee graph exposing what Pierce is so upset about versus what he completely fails to mention. I'll just leave that image hanging for a moment, shall I? Pierce is, of course, attacking benefit fraud, or what he perceives as fraud. People on the take. That's the narrative he's trying to spread, that there's so many of them. But the truth is, as you can see in that graph, it is negligible. Benefit errors are also minimal. Benefits people are entitled to but going unclaimed is rather interesting. It's substantially more, as you can see, right in bright green in the middle of that graph. The bill should be higher than it is now by rights. But many people choose not to claim, largely, I think, because of the stigma surrounding claiming, sown by fools like Pierce. And the elephants in the room are the two separate estimates there of tax avoidance and tax evasion, which are never mentioned and never prioritised, and which this same Tory government that Tory Boy Pierce supports have in no uncertain terms been a part of, with their tax loopholes, their mates' rates, and their corporation supporting, donor encouraging ways. Look at the pandemic again. Let's come back to that for a moment. How much cash was lost to the VIP lane for PPE? Sunak wrote all of that off, which is why his stop the boats mantra doesn't apply to the yachts of those who cashed in, of course, Michelle Mone? But sure, ignore them, chase the poorest instead, who don't have enough to live on. Cash lost to millionaires and billionaires like that is a true harmful hit to the economy. It's not those on benefits doing that. They spend all of their cash in the economy. Not that it's enough, but whatever they do get is spent in the economy. Therefore, they are economically active, in which case, because the more money ordinary people have to spend, since they all spend pretty much all of their income at that low level of income, creates local and regional economic growth, because the money is working. That creates jobs, all because money has to be spent, has to work in order to be of benefit to the economy overall. You give it to a rich person, or let them off some copious amounts of tax evasion or tax avoidance, and it disappears into their copious offshore money bin, never to be seen again, where it languishes forever and certainly isn't doing any work economically. Without people having this cash and spending it, you'd literally see more high street shops going bust than we already are. We just saw Wilko go under. A cheap shop, often used by those with the least to live on, who don't have enough anymore. That shop has gone under. And all the others we've seen collapse in the last 13 years, I'm sure you can think of a few yourself, can be directly linked to the Tories hitting the spending power of all of us at the working classes, and the actions of this hard-right idiot in Andrew Pierce stealing oxygen to spout more bile against those with the least is a threat to the high street and a threat to the British economy. Every pound spent by someone on the high street, whether they work or they don't, is returned to the Treasury and then some via taxation, giving the government more room to spend more money on the things we need. They can print more money to do that. Whether they choose to or not, that's a completely other matter. That's political choice. But that is how the economy works. If you listen to Pierce, though, he thinks it is money that would be better spent on hospitals. Well, if you keep starving people and denying them the basics they need to survive, you will need more hospitals, absolutely. But then your party promised 40 of them, didn't it? And where are they? It's not as if the Tories aren't resurrecting their war on the poor, their bashing of benefits again anyway. It's just that Pierce wants them to do it even faster than they are. Because let's face it, evidently enough people didn't die the first time around. Some 120,000 people whose deaths were directly linked to benefit changes up to 2017. A study published by the British Medical Journal. The Tories then decided to stop counting as it became too embarrassing for them, not because they were afraid of more people losing their lives. The same study discovered that if welfare changes brought in by the coalition government in 2010 hadn't happened, some excess 45,000 deaths could have been avoided. A sign not only that the system was not working prior to the Tories coming in, and with the help of the Liberal Democrats, but instead of making it better, they made it significantly worse. And now they're coming for these people again with more reforms promised in 2025 should they remain in power. The emphasis will not be on the health and well-being of the benefits recipient, but on what they would be deemed capable of doing in the way of work, possibly working from home if needs be. As the pandemic proved, a lot of people are quite capable of doing that, if their health suits it. The new system will see the return of the dreaded work capability assessment, which the Tories had said they'd done away with, but with the new assessment being linked to claiming personal independence payment, PIP, the main non-means tested benefit for disabled people to cover their additional living needs. Therefore, the logical conclusion is if you aren't officially registered as disabled, you're probably going to be found fit to do some kind of work. The changes will, it is estimated, reduce benefits for the average claimant families by some £400 a month, which should delight depraved dunces like Andrew Pierce, but should horrify people that such conversations are happening during a cost of living crisis. This also smacks of a deliberate targeting of people who have recognised health issues which are not classified as disabilities, and long COVID, let's face it, firmly falls into that box. Work will set you free is the Tory mantra once again. It would surprise the hacks the likes of Pierce and any others who celebrate inflicting such misery to be found wearing T-shirts with albeit Mac Frey emblazoned on them at some point. If you're paying attention to anything Andrew Pierce says on this, you're little more than an ill-informed zombie who, like him, gets your rocks off in scaring people less well off than yourself. I can only speculate. But instead of having empathy for those less fortunate, you get off on someone else being more miserable than you are. What hate-filled creatures such people must be, not to mention blatantly unintelligent, when there has been so many examples of wealthy people getting away with being on the take to the tune of so much more cash than your typical benefit claimant is scratching an existence out of over. And this lot would take even more from them. The death toll will inevitably rise again, and Pierce will presumably have a smile on his face about that because he's driving that narrative. Not alone, there are others, but he's the one that's flagged up the other day in the most recent news in his Daily Mail column. People are terrified. My inbox has had several people asking me to highlight this particular story regarding Andrew Pierce and what he said now, because of the fear involved. And how can I not do that when, as a carer myself, I've lived through it? My family are survivors of this the first time around. It is largely what politicised me in the first place. It is where so much of my anger, so much of my rage stems from. And I now have this video small business in this that allows me to talk about it, highlight it, help support my family, to an audience no less, which still humbles me that people even listen to me, frankly, and combat the evil narratives of right-wingers, getting rich behind their newspaper columns and their television appearances promoting what is, in my mind, a cull the poor narrative. Far too many people got sucked into this before. Please don't be sucked in by it again. If people are long-term sick, if they're disabled, they've been assessed as such. Yes, the assessments are rubbish. Yes, the people conducting them are often not properly trained, but that's in order to try and prevent successful claims, not to encourage them. So having succeeded in a claim is in itself an achievement in Tory Britain. But having a trial by media on such people yet again now, encouraging a new wave of neighbours reporting people because they happen to be having a good day, because they've managed to go out in public that day, because they have a Facebook page, God forbid, therefore must be capable of rational thought to some degree, or the all too common, well, they don't look disabled to me attitudes, with the likes of Pierce encouraging people to report that as fraud. All of a sudden, everyone is an assessor. Having been through all of this once myself, these assessments, this war on the poor, I can tell you I still to this day wake up in the night afraid, irrationally as that is, because of what we went through before. It still affects me now. I'm the carer, not even the disabled person in question. If the likes of Pierce were so determined to clamp down on people getting something for nothing, why don't they use their columns instead to report the fraud of this government more? It's a lot higher after all, but then the poorest are a softer and easier target, aren't they? The actions and hate speech, frankly, but that is what this is, surely, of people like Andrew Pierce, is physically repulsive. So why listen to them? Why read their columns? Why watch them on TV? But what do you think, though? Are you enamoured of Pierce? Do you agree with him? If so, I'd love to hear you try and justify it. Are you horrified and frightened like I am, frankly, like the people who have messaged me asking me to cover this story, that this is coming back again? Horrible history looking set to be repeated by a party that clearly thinks it hasn't killed enough people through denying them the means to live. Have your say on this. Be part of this conversation. I want to hear from you on this. What do you think? Thanks for watching, though. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the new Tory DWP Minister, Mel Stride, looks set to take over the mantle of former DWP boss Ian Duncan-Smith as a new Dr. Death as he pushes these reforms forward. And, well, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for those of us frequenting social media, we're well aware of the tiresome bores that get regularly platformed to spout off about whatever has them wailing into their quinoa that day. And one that happens to get on my wick when he pops up now and again is Femi Oluwole. Initially as an ardent Remainer during and post the Brexit vote, who was enough to put even other Remainers off with his particular brand of whinge. But even as that argument has died down, his strive for relevance has made him no less of an article since. This week, though, he's happened across my attention span for attacking RMT Union Deputy Eddie Dempsey and raking up what was, I thought, frankly, old news by this time. That had already been widely discredited, but that he claims is personal, and he needs to get it off his chest for the sake of his own mental health. Now, Oluwole spouted off about this particular issue last year when it was in the news far more prevalently and faced being sued by Dempsey as a result if he didn't pack things in. But now that a year has passed since then and the deadline for that libel challenge from Dempsey has passed, Oluwole has decided to do it again, basically, but made the caveat that all of what he was going to say in his video this time was just theory. Just theory. So it is his opinion, and free speech means you can't be sued for having an opinion. So he's setting out his stall for whatever he followed up with, and that was to accuse Eddie Dempsey of, again, having found common cause with Tommy Robinson and his supporters, implying Dempsey was a racist. Now, at this point, it is worth going over what Eddie Dempsey said at the time and where he was coming from when he said it, because all of this blew up last year following a speech Dempsey made, where Dempsey said, whatever you think about people who turn out for Tommy Robinson or any other demos or any other march like that, there's one thing that unites them people beyond whatever other bigotry that's going on, is their hatred of the liberal left. And they are right to hate them. They are a threat because they are the people who have seen their industries taken away or captured their Labour Party and are now talking to them like they're the scum of the earth. There are too many in the Labour Party right now, and they've made a calculation that there's a certain section at the top end of the working class in alliance with people they calculate from ethnic minorities and the Liberals, that that's enough to get them into power. And they believe that that alliance is all they need, that they can disregard all of the working class people. Right, so that speech caused hell up last year because people, not least like Femi Oluwole here, were claiming it indicated Dempsey's support for Tommy Robinson, for the English Defence League and the like. But it doesn't. It's a warning. A warning of what is happening because of the Labour Party abandoning all workers in favour of appealing to a select few audience at the top end of the working class, as Dempsey put it, the managers and the like, rather than those on the shop floor, so to speak, those on the lower wages, abandoning them and their needs. Having been abandoned by what is supposed to be their party, where else do these people go? They will be angry, upset, disillusioned. They want someone to hate for it. And hate mongers like Tommy Robinson, like the EDL, like others that are out there, telling them all the things they want to hear, playing to their fears, despite the fact they're the fascist hard right, who no more have an interest in their needs in reality than the worst of the Tory party does. Dempsey says these people are right to hate those who have taken over the Labour Party, the liberal left as he calls them. Blairites I prefer, Starmeroids. They aren't left at all, in my opinion. Centrists at a bare minimum, and I consider Femi Oluwole to absolutely be a centrist. In fact, he demonstrates it here ably, to my mind, by misconstruing what Dempsey said. Dempsey is pointing out the danger that driving people into the arms of Tommy Robinson represents. A rise in fascism again as Labour abandons the workers, and that is why Labour becomes viewed as a threat to them. Dempsey is presenting a warning here, not a recommendation. Oluwole is also, in my view, painting Dempsey as being a racist by claiming Dempsey, as a supporter of Robinson here, which, as I've explained, he is not, is encouraging people to hate ethnic minorities because Labour are appealing to them. Actually, Dempsey said Labour are calculating ethnic minorities are included, not that they actually are. So it's just another misrepresentation of Dempsey from start to finish. What is fact, though, are Dempsey's actions, which Oluwole has ignored because it doesn't fit his narrative, which is that Dempsey is one of the fash. Dempsey is not. He grew up on a council estate where many of his mates did indeed turn to Tommy Robinson, but he didn't, though. He turned the other way completely, and he has a long record of organising not for fascism, but against it, because he recognises it better than most people do. Perhaps that's why some in their middle-class, centrist, quinoa-munching bubbles are so shocked by his words, because they were blunt and they were true, because he grew up surrounded by it. And that's why he has this track record of not just campaigning against fascism, but organising against it as well. For example, in 2014, Dempsey was involved in organising an anti-fascist demo in Cricklewood against the South East Alliance, who are an offshoot of the Essex branch of Robinson's EDL. He's not on Robinson's side. He's probably as opposed to him as you can possibly get. Look, you know what you get from the right. You know they aren't on your side. But neither of these centrists or right-wing Blairites pretend left, even who pretend they oppose the Tories and the hard right, but they actually fight far harder to prevent anything actually changing because it doesn't suit them to. We saw it with Corbyn. His manifesto contained all the solutions to the current crises that we're in, yet the attacks on him personally meant none of them are on the table anymore. The hard right Tories doing what they always do, and Starmer's Labour now a right-wing hellhole once again. Ignore the smears, ignore the snidiness, ignore the snobbery, ignore the lies. Oluwole's video rapidly descended into a woe is me performance. Why are you threatening to sue the black man, calling you out for siding with Tommy Robinson, when nothing was further from the truth? Tribune writer Taj Ali, a guy who grew up in Luton as an ethnic minority kid himself, surrounded there by much the same people as Dempsey grew up with when the EDL were at their height, has slammed Oluwole for his dishonesty. Because everything Oluwole is saying about Dempsey is exactly what the liberal left Dempsey spoke out against want to be the narrative. Working class resentment of middle class liberals being exploited by the far right. That is what Dempsey was pointing out. That is the danger. And Oluwole in his ridiculous video is, in my opinion, basically providing cover for that now. Dempsey threatened to sue Oluwole because of defamatory statements made trying to depict him as a racist. And now he's doing it again, just picking his words more carefully. He's learned nothing. He seems utterly blinded to the dangers his own rhetoric is stoking up. Does nothing to stop people being taken in by the Tommy Robinsons of society. There's narratives like this attacking those issuing the warnings instead of issuing warnings themselves are a bigger risk to society. And it all just smacks of having an axe to grind for the last year until he was out of danger of being sued just so he could vent his spleen precisely where he left off. I have nothing but contempt for media discourse like this. We need more Eddie Dempseys who are unafraid to speak truth in their blunt, plain-speaking, no-holds-barred manner, speaking from experience as they do, because the country needs to be shocked into action. And a damn sight fewer Femi Oluwoles are needed, contributing absolutely nothing whatsoever to political or societal discourse. What do you think, though? Was Eddie right to say what he said, or are you more of a Femi fan? Do try and explain that to me. I really can't see it myself. Let me know in the comments below. Have your say on the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. You know, there's a video recommendation where Dempsey's boss, Mick Lynch, was also laid into the liberal left, as Dempsey put it, though I think he's too kind on that. The Blairite red Tories are Starmer's Labour, branding Starmer a loser, no less, before he's even reached power. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next bid. Cheers, folks.